Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description. Without opening his eyes, he pulled a sly smile onto his face and got out of bed, crashing into the wall with all his might. Abruptly, with all his strength, leaving a clear imprint of his head on the dusty wallpaper. "Something's wrong here," he said, feeling the wall where his famous smile was imprinted. "Could it be that Matsumoto managed to get me drunk and I ended up in an unknown place again while drunk? And what happened to my memory?" Ikemara Jin hated his childhood friend and always tried to avoid her. But at the same time, he understood that this friend was the only one in his difficult life, the only one who could bring him out of melancholy, at least with her irritating behavior. But now Ikemara was not concerned with this, but with his own memory, which was bizarrely intertwined with someone else's. Having abandoned attempts to sort it out, he mentally sent a request to his Zanpakuto. It would be easier for her to sort out the memory from the inner world. Ikemara did something he didn't want to do. He opened his eyes. "This looks familiar. I would have thought this was Matsumoto's room. But there are some details missing here." A garbage dump appeared before his eyes. A big dirty garbage dump, usually left by his girlfriend after another drinking binge. Ikemara didn't like getting drunk, and he didn't like the mess in his room and the hangover that followed it even more. Therefore, as soon as Matsumoto hinted at having a drink with her, Ikemara would immediately leave, covering his tracks. Ikemara Jin noticed something strange. The ceilings were too high, the doors and windows were too big, and if he looked straight ahead, his gaze was drawn to a huge pile of trash under a large, tall, dirty gray table. "Oh my God, Aizen! Why am I so short?" Ikemara Jin remembered his childhood. A happy childhood, when he could do whatever he wanted without ruining his reputation and position in society. It was only later, when he became an adult, that he developed a certain style of behavior that he adhered to, learned a lot about etiquette in high society and oratory. As an adult, Ikemara created his image, which became an integral part of his life. Ikemara Jin emerged from his memories. There was no point in distracting himself from the outside world, let the Zanpakuto deal with them herself. Ikemara Jin walked around the piles of trash and looked into the mirror. A red-haired 3-year-old boy with 3 whiskers on each cheek, just like a fox, looked at him from there. He felt sick from these whiskers. But what made him feel worse was that at that very moment he remembered where he had seen this face. And at that very moment, he remembered his entire past life. Apparently, the Zanpakuto had completely sorted out his memory. "Well, Aizen-san, I didn't think that your passion for anime would help me so much. Surely this was your plan. To become an immortal troll, to sit on a chair forever and watch interactive movies with pathos and battles. It's a pity that I didn't live to see that moment. I would have made fun of everyone." Dreams. Ikemara Jin did not die completely after his death. After all, Hagyoka fulfilled Jin's wish, which was hammered into him since childhood by punishments for his frequent mistakes and shortcomings, when he did not have time to nobly say goodbye to those who colored his pastime. It was when he was caught and beaten for his pranks that a desire to become invulnerable arose in the depths of his soul. After his death at the hands of Aizen, he became invulnerable and invisible, and in return he lost his materiality and the ability to influence the world around him. It was a long time when he watched his native world, the new war against the Quincy, Ichigo, the destruction of this world, and its inglorious end. I really had the misfortune to get into trouble with you, Naruto." Ikemara Jin had tried many times to dig up the remains of his soul inside himself, but unfortunately, there was nothing. Only the remains of memories lay forlornly in the corner of his inner world, neatly folded by his Zanpakuto. And the fox, sleeping in the cage, did not even notice the change of the body's owner. Ikemara Jin once again plunged into the depths of his memories. He was interested in how he ended up in this world. When his home world was being destroyed, Ikemara was very afraid for himself. Living as a disembodied mind was hellish torture for him, but this life was greatly brightened by observing the world around him. What would happen if the world he was observing was destroyed? I shouldn't have flown so close to Hagyoku. Ikemara once again looked sadly at his reflection in the mirror. But since this is my body now. At the moment of the world's destruction, he was next to Aizen. It was at that moment that he really wanted to be in any other place. Who knew that Hidyoku would fulfill both of his wishes again? A new world and a new body. Moreover, a world that he knew about from watching the anime brought to Hueco Mundo by Aizen. Hidyoku definitely watched anime with Aizen, and definitely has a good sense of humor. However, Ikimaru couldn't stare into the mirror with a thoughtful look for long. The child's body demanded movement, or at least some activity. Shaking his head and examining his face from different angles, he recognized it as suitable and began to think about his future destiny. What should I do? So many options. I don't even know what to choose. Ikimaru winced. He knew what to do, but he didn't like doing things like that. He really didn't like it. Usually he would run away in time to avoid doing it. In order to avoid doing it, he graduated from the academy even faster than he wanted and became a third officer. And so, after rummaging through his new memory, his Zanpakuto neatly arranged in a certain order, he made a brilliant decision. I'll ask someone else. Yes, exactly. The child must have a nanny. I'll ask her. Ikimaru didn't know what chakra was or how to use it. Everything he knew was spied on by Aizen, who once brought a large plasma screen from the living world along with a portable computer filled with a huge amount of anime. But he knew for sure that chakra also contained spiritual energy, which meant he could handle it. To begin with, he decided to make a regular spiritual ball. You know, a white firefly made of spiritual particles. Something's wrong here. Ikimaru shook his head. The ball was yellow-red and 8 times larger than expected. In addition, it was semi-material and began to slowly attract the surrounding air, shrinking in size. It's too much. Too much. 1 to 8. Ikimaru thought. That was exactly how his cold Ririka felt to the warm energy of his body. It was incredibly high. Ikimaru knew the canon very well and understood perfectly well that this was a full-fledged Kage reserve. And he understood perfectly well that Naruto had a reserve greater than his, and he knew that this was not the limit. But what was even more terrible for Ikimaru was that the energy in Naruto's body was a couple of times greater than the reserve of the average captain. A terrible child. I just shudder from understanding what would have happened if they had trained him since childhood. He would have been stronger than Madara. Much stronger, Ikimaru smiled with a predatory grin. But I will fix it. He. Now this body belongs to me. At the same time, the real Naruto watched the actions and deeds of the next alien with interest. He immediately recognized him from the memory of previous hitmen. And his interest in what was happening grew even more. I think I'll have to seal some of his powers so he doesn't go crazy, Naruto said. I hope he brightens up my series of reincarnations. I haven't seen anything like that in a long time. In a small apartment for 2 people, or to be more precise, in a dorm room, in the middle of the night stood a golden-haired boy who looked to be 3 or 4 years old. His blue eyes were slightly squinted, and his mouth was curved in a pitiful semblance of a snake's smile. However, this smile now did not resemble a snake's in any way, and this greatly saddened Ikimaru. After all, it was he who stood in this room, in front of a dusty mirror, soiled by the touch of greasy hands. The smile was more like a fox's, and 3 stripes on his cheeks further enhanced the effect. Have those who look after this boy never cleaned his apartment? Ikimaru asked his reflection. Ikimaru looked around the garbage dump again. And that was it. Ikimaru couldn't give any other name to the place he was in. Brown stains on the floor, sticky dirt on the ceiling, green paint in the corner. Or not exactly paint. After all, in the dim moonlight that slipped into the room through the window, it was impossible to distinguish even the brightest colors. In the darkness, they all faded and became various shades of gray, slightly tinted by the silver-blue rays of the moonlight. Looking closely, Ikimaru recognized mold in this greenish spot. It was mold, like a mysterious monster, that had woven thin veins around the damp corner, and most likely, its roots went deep into the stone wall, entwining the entire house right down to its foundation. Ikimaru felt a strange dislike for all those who forced a small child to live in such a terrible place. They probably didn't even come here, receiving money for excellent work, and the monthly inspection, judging by the boy's memory, turned a blind eye to the horror that was happening, creating false reports. After all, there were people in the inspection, and people hated the little demon. Why not ruin the child's life in this way? So what if he was a child? He was the one who killed their family and friends, and he could very well kill you too. How come they haven't put him on a leash yet? Ikemaru's dislike slowly grew into hatred. But then it disappeared. Yar. I shouldn't be like them, I'm above that. Ikemaru stretched his lips, and used to this, into a fox-like smile. Yes, why should I be like them? Enormous power splashed in his body, preventing him from thinking coherently, concentrating, and controlling his emotions. Now Ikemaru understood Kurosaki Ichigo and his sometimes stupid actions as never before, as well as why he fought much more effectively when his power was low. Ikemaru began to understand Aizen very well, who after the implantation of the Hugyoku began to make one mistake after another. He understood very well why Naruto was overly cheerful and happy. Power splashed, moved throughout his body, pressed on his mind, asking to come out. And the more he was in this body, the more he realized that he was starting to go crazy. We have to do something, Ikemaru said worriedly, looking around. We have to seal this power. Otherwise I'm starting to feel omnipotent, and that could end badly. But Ikemaru was prevented from taking action by a strange feeling inside him. As if something ancient and powerful had looked at him, assessed and approved of his actions. He had only felt a similar feeling before from Kurosaki Ichigo, before his battle with Aizen, and also from Hugyoku. A feeling so strong and at the same time imperceptible that it went beyond the understanding of ordinary people. The next feeling was a flickering connection with his Zanpakuto. Ikemaru shuddered. The last time he felt this way was when the inner hollow tried to absorb Shinso. And he almost succeeded, if not for Ikemaru's intervention. It happened when Aizen, accidentally, directed the Hugyoku's influence at him. If not for the strengthened connection with his Zanpakuto, he would have become a new test subject. But Ikemaru managed to rip out the Zanpakuto in time and pierce the hollow with it, sending its soul to reincarnate as Rukongai. But now the only one in his inner world was Fox. Hello? Dear Shinso, how are you? Yes, master, a joyful voice answered. This answer was unexpected, but pleasant. Ikemaru felt the tension that had been building up until this point disappear. Since nothing had happened to the Zanpakuto, the faltering connection meant something completely different. Master? Ikemaru began to have growing suspicions about his Zanpakuto. No, not at all like the ones he had a moment ago. Shinso's joy usually did not bode well for his master. And even more so, such a reverent submissive attitude. The last time she had informed him in the same way about the possibility of achieving Bankai without materializing it in the outside world. Ikemaru shuddered at the subsequent memories associated with mastering it. This was hell, arranged every night by his Zanpakuto. Dear Shinso, I hope you are alright? Ikemaru wasn't worried, but Shinso was too happy and it was very suspicious. May I come down to you, to the inner world, the greatest of the greatest Zanpakuto? I give you permission. Come down, master. And the sooner the better. And if I don't want to go down? Huh! Shinso? I am your master after all, so listen to me. Ikemaru returned his smile to his face, but his muscles, unaccustomed to it, ached and his face twisted. You have no choice, master, Shinso said, suddenly serious. You must see this. Shinso, Ikemaru said, feeling the worry coming from his Zanpakuto. I hope I don't see you dismembered? You know, I've never been good at putting puzzles together. I could easily confuse your arms and legs. They're so similar, with 5 fingers. Ikemaru closed his eyes and a moment later found himself in a dark, long, foul-smelling corridor, a rather unsightly sight. The corridor reminded him strongly of the Godiai sewer system. There was murky water underfoot, hiding the floor. If there was one, the walls were gray concrete covered with a thin layer of mold and moss, and the ceiling ended in endless darkness. Ikemaru could not tell where the light was coming from in this world, but he could definitely give a direction to where it was likely coming from. It was coming from under the water, painting the corridor in swampy colors, with yellowish veins. Ikemaru looked at his body. He was an exact copy of Naruto in reality, except that his hair was white and his eyes were more narrowed, making his face a little roguish and cunning. It was worth wishing, and there he was, looking at him from the reflection in the water, an albino with a fox-like smile and slit eyes. Long silver hair fell to his shoulders, covered with a white captain's haori, worn over a black Shinigami uniform. Yar, there is so much energy here that it drowns out my senses. Ikemara looked around, but it didn't make it any clearer where he was supposed to go. The yellow-green water, illuminated from within, was still swaying quietly, giving no hint of any current. Ikemara raised his thin, skinny, pale-looking palm and released a little Ryatsu. He was immediately surrounded by flashes of bluish fire, which immediately went out, replaced by a slight flickering of air. A red ribbon immediately formed from the air on his palm, the other end of which went deep into the wall, becoming ghostly. Ikemaru stared at the wall and thought for a long time. Usually, a spiritual thread shows a minimal path bypassing obstacles, because the spiritual thread consisted of a flow of Ryatsu scattered in the air, and this Ryatsu could not pass through objects, since there was too little of it for this. In any situation there are at least two ways out. I would never have thought that I would witness a third. Ikemaru felt a strange desire to hit the wall, especially since the thread was going right into it. Suddenly, a drop of water fell from the ceiling hidden by shadows. It fell unexpectedly loudly, dispelling the ringing silence for a moment. Ikemaru raised his gaze, but not finding anyone, continued to look around. Jin turned left and walked, looking closely at the red thread. It still rested against the wall. He simply walked, constantly turning left, but despite this, the spiritual thread continued to rest against the wall, not turning even a millimeter. I seem to be lost, Jin said, looking at the imprint of his forehead on the wall, or rather at the silver hairs stuck to it. Still, it wasn't the best idea to bang his head against the wall of the sewer. Ikemaru went further. Sooner or later, one could find a way out of even such a strange labyrinth, if one kept to one of the sides. Everything is fine, Jin said, going around for the third time. So what if the trace of my head was first on the right, and now on the left again? The main thing is that the thread is always pointing to the right. The stranger in the dark cloak appeared behind Ikemaru. He had been watching him from the very beginning, slipping away in time and hiding in the shadows. And only now did he decide to act. People are never able to focus on one thing for long. But because of this, they are able to notice many things. Ikemaru was looking for a way out of the strange situation where he was unable to escape from a mental trap. Ikemaru was sure that this was it. Someone stronger than him had set a trap in his own mind that could not be escaped in the usual way. So he continued on his way again, but this time creating a path of spiritual particles under his feet. The same swamp-colored corridor. The same mark on the wall, but this time to his right. And a glass path glowing with white light, resting against the wall. It was the same path he had created earlier from spiritual particles. Oh, it's not nice to mock a person, Ikemaru smiled. Especially if that person is me. Ikemaru turned towards the slight disturbance of neutral Ryatsu. Although this disturbance was almost indistinguishable from others, if you knew what to look for, you could easily determine the location of a hiding person. It was thanks to this sense, trained for hundreds of years, that Ikemaru could determine Aizen's location, even when he disappeared into the normal spectrum after ascending. His eyes could not be relied upon, because Aizen could easily hide his true location by hypnotizing himself in the enemy's mind. But his hypnosis did not extend to Ryatsu, which is what Ikemaru took advantage of. "This is yours," asked a faceless voice, and a shapeless hand holding a spear appeared from the shadows. Ikemaru opened his eyes in amazement. The unknown person had done the unimaginable. He had taken the Zanpakuto of another Shinigami and subjugated it. In Jin's home world, no one was capable of this, not even the Quincy. Although they could steal Bankai, the Shirkai always remained with the owner. It was impossible to completely separate the essence of the Shinigami from the Shinigami itself. It was impossible to split the soul into parts. This was the immutable law of the Soul Society. "Who are you?" Ikemaru asked the only question he had when he regained his composure. "And how did you manage to steal my cutie? My Shinso?" A muscular figure with long red hair and an incredibly heavy, indifferent look slowly emerged from the shadows. Ikemaru's composure left him again. Two silhouettes stood on the roof of a two-story building. Both wore dark cloaks and white masks with strange designs. One was shorter than the other, wore a tiger mask with medium-length blonde hair hanging down over it. The other wore a raven mask and wore a darker cloak. These silhouettes stood motionless, watching the window of the two-story building opposite. It was more shabby and old-looking than the others, and seemed more eerie and unpleasant to look at. Many small cracks covered the walls of this building, the shutters were dry and did not close, and there were many small holes in the roof. The next moment, the moon was covered by clouds and everything was plunged into darkness. However, the darkness did not hinder the shinobi standing on the roof at all. And these were precisely they, faceless shinobi belonging to ANBU and faithfully serving their village of Konoha. One of the faceless shinobi, wearing a raven mask, was thinking. He was thinking about his village, about the village government and laws, about what was right and wrong. The ANBU have done a lot of evil, following orders, and have never thought about why they are doing it or who is ordering them. Of course, it would be wrong to take action, but that doesn't change the fact that they should think about why they are doing evil. For the sake of Konoha or for the ambitions of the ruling elite? What would happen if the Faceless were ordered to slaughter a village, for the sake of the village itself? The great evil is not those who sit at the top, but those whose wishes the top fulfills in order to stay in their place. It was the crowd, merciless, wanting their bread and bloody spectacles, that ruled the village. And if the crowd wants blood, then the top will have to spill it. Of course, the desires of the crowd can be controlled. But the government has not yet reached that. Although, who knows the capabilities of the current Hokage? No one. But everyone knows that he is loved by the people. Thinking again, Itachi? The guy in the tiger mask asked the dark-haired guy. Itachi spun around, his eyes glowing scarlet, giving a depressing effect to anyone who looked into them, and slowly pulled out a dark katana from the sheath on his belt. The guy in the tiger mask stumbled and the sound of cracking tiles echoed like thunder in the silent silence. You broke the rule. Itachi glanced heavily at his partner's figure. On a mission, we hide the names of our partners, and we don't give away ours. Especially on this one. I didn't mean to. The faceless partner standing opposite Itachi swallowed, looking into his eyes, glowing scarlet. They were too frightening, too many scary stories about them were circulating in the village. This is my first mission. Forgive me. I know, Mizuki, Itachi replied, placing the dark katana against his partner's white neck and pushing his collar aside. His scarlet eyes glared at the exposed area of his body. This look involuntarily caused goosebumps on Mizuki's body. That's why we were sent on this dirty mission. A dirty mission? Mizuki trembled, unable to move. Itachi silently pointed to the dark silhouette of the building they were watching. This is the Jinchuriki's house. Could it be? Mizuki turned pale. He was trying to find a way to escape in his mind. He would give anything right now just to get away from this place. His chances of killing the Jinchuriki were 0. Yes, it is a very dirty business, Itachi replied. Don't even try to run. My Sharingan will see your movements before you make them. Itachi pointed the tip of his katana at the house. Mizuki had to obey and jump onto the balcony of that house. The Uchiha landed next to him and again pointed the katana at Mizuki's neck. Now quietly open the window and come into the room. Itachi's voice was as cold as ever. Mizuki was nervous, trying to find a way out. The window shutters were difficult to open with his trembling fingers. The dried paint was painfully digging into his fingers, and the rusty handle was hard to turn, making a quiet cracking sound. The moon had come out from behind the clouds again, illuminating their silhouettes. Killing a Jinchuriki is stupid and wasteful. Itachi will most likely kill me, pretending to save this kid and thereby getting a promotion in the ANBU service, Mizuki thought. I have a chance to escape when I get into the room. There will be no other opportunity, I have to try. But the escape failed. Half the kitchen and the entire table were covered in trash, and by the door, near the mirror, lay the unconscious body of the Jinchuriki. A shinobi in a dog mask and 2 katanas on his back was leaning over him. His short silver hair swayed comically as he turned toward the window. Mizuki recognized him. Hatake Kakashi. What are you doing here, Kakashi? Mizuki asked, jumping off the windowsill. Kakashi looked at the stunned Mizuki and then at Itachi, who stood next to his partner. The Uchiha nodded to Hatake in greeting, immediately placing the blade of his katana to Mizuki's throat. Mizuki, have you ever been told that on a mission, you can't call each other by their first names? They stood opposite each other. The silver-haired and red-haired fox. Ikemura's gaze was dumbfounded, and the red-haired one's was cold and emotionless. The first wore a white kimono, with a dark lining and the same white haori thrown over it, and the second was in a black cloak with blood-red lines on the hem and sleeves, long leather gloves to the elbow, and held a dark long blade in his right hand and the same dark spear in his left. However, the spear immediately crumbled with a crack into small glowing particles, which were immediately absorbed into the guy's skin. Ho! Kurosaki, Ikemura froze. His eyes narrowed, turning into narrow slits, his lips stretched in a fox-like smile from ear to ear. How many years, how many winters? Long time no see. Answer me a question, Kurosaki. What are you doing here? That's what I should be asking, Ichigo replied. Where are we and what are you doing here? Along Ichigo's hand on the gloves, there were lines of pulsating blue light that reached the tips of his fingers, and from there it passed onto the sword, covering it with a thin layer of luminous particles. Even now, when Ikemura saw the external manifestations of Kurosaki's Ryuriku, he could not feel it. He did not feel the Ryatsu emanating from the sword. Although he saw how it glowed, he did not feel the Ryatsu emanating from Ichigo at all, although he clearly saw the light of the azure film replacing the iris of the eyes. All this showed that Kurosaki had crossed the line of ordinary Shinigami powers. And you've changed. Now you're not just scary. Ikemura smiled weakly. You're terrifying, Ichigo. Answer the question, Jin, Ichigo said. Where are we? Where are we? Do you want to know that badly? Ikemura smiled even wider. Unlike Kurosaki, he was quicker to get his bearings in the situation, since he knew where he was from the very beginning. Yes, Ichigo replied. Otherwise, I will destroy your Zanpakuto. Ichigo needed to be distracted somehow, and Ikemura knew how to do it. Naruto's memory had a strong effect on his critical thinking, as had the loss of his Zanpakuto. We're in a yaoi fanfic. Ichigo's face reflected the complex work of his supermind. At least that's what Ikemura thought. A blatant lie, told in an absolutely confident tone, would make anyone think. And Ikemura had a huge amount of experience in blowing the minds of others. He especially enjoyed mocking Aizen, but unfortunately, he quickly developed an immunity to such things. And soon, Aizen surpassed Jin in this art. While Super Ichigo was thinking, Ikemura was looking for ways and means to retreat in case of conflict. He did not want to fight with a god, who was able to crush him with one wave of his hand. He did not want to fall under the wrath of Super Ichigo at all. But unfortunately, there were no escape routes, he could only rely on his eloquence and Ichigo's prudence. But in any case, Ikemura really wanted to run away as far as possible. Ikemura flinched. These thoughts were too unnatural for him. Why did he have to run somewhere? Why was he so afraid of Kurosaki's presence? After all, he couldn't do anything bad to him in principle. But despite his thoughts, a strange feeling of danger continued to press on his nerves, and this feeling was incredibly similar to the feeling of danger emanating from Aizen when Ikemura tried to kill him. His thoughts were interrupted by Kurosaki. You lied, Kurosaki said, and Ikemura felt his heart skip a beat. But he managed to regain his composure with difficulty. But I was able to read your memory. Now everything is in place. You read my memory? Ikemura was on the verge of shock again. So we are in the inner world of Naruto, whom you absorbed. Ichigo stated the fact, looking around. Now I understand why I ended up in the cage. I barely got out of it, but I still couldn't get out of the labyrinth. You got out of the cage? Ikemura felt like there was nothing else to shock him with. Only now, when Ichigo said this, did he notice some changes in his appearance. Yes, Kurosaki replied indifferently when Ikemura recovered from his shock. It's a pity that my Ryatsu is running out and I can no longer maintain this form. Interesting. Ikemura narrowed his eyes sarcastically and began to openly feel him up and down with his gaze. Kurosaki was subtly different from his former self. This was expressed in fox-like ears, reminiscent of elven ones, 3 small stripes on each cheek and 9 ghostly scarlet tails growing out of his ass. Which Ikimaru immediately hastened to report. Yar yar. Do you shit with your tails? Or do they grow from your tailbone? Ikimaru asked, with a thoughtful expression on his face. Although knowing your luck. The very next moment, Ikimaru was having a hard time dodging the blade of a sword that was flying at such a tremendous speed that it seemed to cut through space. Ikimaru, it's a very bad idea to joke about someone who is many times stronger than you, Ichigo said. But that doesn't matter now. After what I've learned, there's only one small thing left. I'll simply defeat you to take over this body. Wait, Kurosaki. Ikimaru listened attentively to something and swore briefly. What are you talking about? I'll just kill you before this form wears off. We have problems. Ikimaru smiled. And what problems? I think you'll find out for yourself. Kurosaki closed his eyes and concentrated on the sensations coming from Ikimaru. The next moment, he repeated the words of the hollow that had read Ikimaru's current memory with him. The word was short and pithy, but it accurately described the situation they were in. Scribe. Ikimaru only curled his lips sarcastically at this statement. He smiled even more sarcastically when he noticed the changes in his inner world that had occurred since the beginning of their conversation. Kurosaki's fingertips, in which he was not holding the katana, began to glow, and after a few moments, a spear was formed from the light particles. So what are you going to do, Ichigo? Skewer me like shish kebab on my own weapon? What are you standing there for, Ikimaru? Grabbed Shinso and quickly chopped the infidels into small cabbage. Ichigo tried to pierce his chest with a spear, but missed. When did you manage to screw up? How did they notice the substitution? Kurosaki, be calm. Ikimaru replied, scared but not showing it. The destruction of your home world and the possession of a fox should worry you more than 3 people in funny masks leaning over us. However, we have a problem. I can't materialize Shinso in the outside world and I don't know how to control chakra. We are doomed. What? At that moment, Ichigo's eyes widened as he saw his super form dissipate. His ears had completely turned into fox ears, his kimono had become a regular black one, but with an orange lining, his eyes had become golden, with slightly elongated pupils, and the furrows on his cheeks, symbolizing a fox's whiskers, had become slightly more pronounced. But what surprised Ikimaru the most was the fact that Ichigo had become younger, and continued to grow younger before his eyes. Now we're definitely finished. Kurosaki jumped up to Jin and grabbed his Haori. Ikimaru, do something! Gina was pierced by Kurosaki's pitiful gaze, which in his fox-like form, looked very effective. Only now did Ikimaru notice that not only Kurosaki had grown younger, but he himself as well. Apparently, they couldn't remain in adult forms for long until their physical body aged. The soul in this world was too connected to the body. Yar, get off my Haori, Kurosaki, you've become too emotional, control yourself, Ikimaru answered. My control is too weak. I'll just disperse chakra into the air. How am I supposed to defeat 3 Soul Society lieutenant-level shinobi? Make a joke so that they die laughing? Sorry, but I'm not capable of such a thing. Maybe you'll deal with them yourself? The corridor had also changed a lot during their conversation. It wasn't so creepy now, and the water under their feet had become lighter and cleaner, so much so that the fluorescent lamps placed along the edges of the rusty iron path that lay at the bottom were visible. I can't! Kurosaki stamped his foot. His red ears twitched comically. It was pretty damning, especially considering that Kurosaki looked like a 5-year-old. I've used up all my Ryatsu and now I'll have 2 years to recover. You know, traveling in the interworld is hard, really hard. They might be killing us, Kurosaki, and you're talking about traveling. Ikimaru! Kurosaki couldn't hold back, breaking into a scream. He had already tried to push this asshole out of his inner world several times so that he could sort out the situation. Kurosaki didn't know how, but he was sure that Ikimaru would get out of any situation. Ichigo was absolutely sure of this, and no arguments could convince him otherwise. Get out of here already, Shinso said and kicked her master in the ass. In the meantime, I'll talk to this cutie. Eh? Shinso? Kurosaki looked at the girl standing in front of him in shock. She was incredibly similar to Ikimaru. The same white hair, the same kimono. The same cunning look of narrowed eyes and movements. The only difference was her right hand, which slowly turned into a blade. "Do you recognize me, cutie?" Ichigo's fox ear twitched comically again. The last thing Ikemaru remembered before he surfaced from the depths of his mind was the worried face of the red kitsune that Ichigo had turned into, as well as the squeal of his Zanpakuto, who pounced on him with pink cheeks, immediately began to tug at his cheeks and squeeze his ears. "Naya Naya Naya. Kawaii. I can't help myself." Shinso licked her lips. "Who kidnapped me and treated me cruelly? Was it you by any chance? Leave me alone, stupid Zanpakuto. We're dealing with a matter of life and death here." "Wah. Opfusti. It wasn't me. It was another me." Ikemaru opened his eyes and was immediately blinded by a bright light, and a terrible stench mixed with the smell of chlorine and alkali dived into his nose. He did not know what the unknown people did to him, but he felt very well that he could not move his arms. They were carefully tied to his body with thick fabric. A straitjacket flashed through Ikemaru's mind. For the particularly violent. Ikemaru tried to take as much fresh air as possible into his lungs, which seemed to be stuck together from being in an uncomfortable position for so long. He blinked, tried to see something, free his hands and reach out to his chakra. But neither of these things worked. The annoying creaking of floors could be heard from everywhere. Ikemaru had some unpleasant memories associated with this sound. At first he thought he was in an interrogation room and was expecting the blow that brought the victims into order. But when his eyes got used to the light, he realized that an ordinary lamp was shining into his eyes, and the straitjacket turned out to be an ordinary blanket, which they had carefully covered him with and tucked in at the edges. Something fell on his feet and caught his attention. It was an ordinary black nightcap, with 2 button eyes and a red handkerchief sewn on where the mouth should be. In Naruto's memory, this cap was given to him by an orphan like him, sewn for a holiday. Ikemaru looked at it for a few seconds, and then was distracted and looked around the surrounding space. What he saw made him experience a short-term stupor. "Kurosaki, answer me." Ikemaru just looked. "How can I live with this? We all make mistakes." Ichigo answered succinctly. "I made a mistake once with the 7 wonders of Karakura. So don't worry and accept it as a given." A loud splash was heard in the inner world. Apparently Shinso had not given up her desire to catch the elusive Ichigo. "No, that's not what I mean," Ikemaru replied. "How can I unsee all this?" Itachi stood in the kitchen with his eyes glowing with a ghostly red light, in a majestic pose and with the most concentrated expression on his face, cleaning a plate. Next to him, a shinobi in a tiger mask was scrubbing the floors, and to the left, sprawled on a pile of garbage, a white-haired shinobi was lying and reading a red book, occasionally giggling. "What's wrong with that? We're in the body of a small child, the village's strategic weapon. We simply have to look after him. And the fact that he's being looked after by 3 stoned and completely drunk ANBU." Itachi put the plate on the table, but it slipped. Uchiha saved it from falling to the floor, but the plate got dirty again. He started cleaning it again, occasionally swaying from side to side. Ikemaru's psyche cracked. Itachi dirtied the plate again. Kakashi giggled, reading an upside-down book. A plan of revenge for his poor psyche immediately matured in Ikemaru's head. But first he had to wait until they cleaned up the house. After all, Orochimaru wasn't going to do such a dirty deed for them. Ikemaru wasn't going to. So, pretending to be asleep, he continued to watch the ANBU. He closed his eyes, mimicked a sleepy babble, and lay on his side, continuing to monitor their spiritual powers. Gradually, his eyes began to stick together, and Ikemaru did not notice how he dozed off. The clock in the kitchen ticked peacefully, counting down the night time. Itachi glanced at Hatake and indicated the time with his eyes. The white-haired shinobi sighed, put the book in his pouch, and climbed down from the pile of trash. He had an unpleasant job ahead of him. A rather unpleasant sound of creaking floors woke Ikemaru from his slumber. This time there was no longer an unpleasant smell, instead there was fresh warm air, like the summer on the shore of some sea. Ikemaru realized that the moment had come. It was necessary to come up with a plan and start acting. Itachi put the washed glass on an iron tray near the same iron sink, and took a new one. In an hour, the garbage dump turned into a rather cozy kitchen. Wooden cabinets, a crystal chandelier, tiled floors and windows sparkled with pristine cleanliness. All of this was carefully washed and wiped with a dry rag. The cleanliness was ideal. Itachi pointed at a dirty place with his gaze, and in a moment it sparkled like a brand new mirror. Ikemaru marveled at how quietly and professionally the guy in the tiger mask worked. Just like him when Unohana caught him stealing alcohol for Kairaku. He still remembered that day when he ran around the hospital wing on trembling legs, looking for the smallest speck of dust. He had surprised many Shinigami who knew him, some even tried to tease him, but Shinso, who was rarely on display, quickly shut up their gossip. No one dares tease Ikemaru except himself. Ikemaru opened his eye a little wider to take in the room more closely. A soft click and the dark blade of a katana came out of its sheath. Ikemaru recognized it, the kind used by low-level ninjas in his world for covert operations. The surface of the blade was specially made matte so as not to shine. The next moment, this blade was pressed to the throat of the guy in the tiger mask. The ANBU man swallowed. "You dared to wake a child?" Itachi whispered. "And what do you have to say in your defense?" "Itachi," Kakashi sighed tiredly, opening his book and slumping in his chair. "Don't pressure him. He tried his best, he cleaned up. Don't make him clean up after himself, too. Ikemaru is ready. It's time to go on stage and entertain the audience." Instead of standing up and scaring everyone present with a scream, which is what Ikemaru had planned to do in revenge for his poor nerves, he felt his consciousness begin to float away into unknown distances again. No matter how hard Ikemaru tried to emerge from this strange state, he could not do anything. "Kurosaki, take a break from fighting Shinso and tell me what's wrong with me," Ikemaru asked, not fully understanding the strange sensations in his head. KHH. "Oh. He passed out," Shinso answered for him. His eyes were becoming increasingly droopy. The last thing Ikemaru remembered before he passed out was Itachi's focused gaze, perplexedly massaging his temples. "We are doomed." Ikemaru opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling with interest. Yesterday's events still couldn't get out of his head, making him worry about his fate. He still couldn't say what exactly he screwed up, what he did wrong, but he could definitely say that such oddities fit perfectly into Naruto's everyday life. Ikemaru, due to the fact that Hueco Mundo was incredibly boring and he had a lot of free time, watched not only a lot of anime, but also a bunch of fan fiction for them, and knew his status very well. Many time travelers in his place would have tried to keep a low profile, which would immediately attract the attention of Konoha's secret organizations. After all, Naruto, judging by the memories, turned 6 the previous day, was a very active child and did a lot of strange things. What is the confession worth that he would kill all the inhabitants of Konoha if he remained hungry again? Usually, no one paid attention to such things, because what can you expect from a fool? The fox was reliably sealed, the increase in strength would only be in case of a mortal danger, and even then, just enough to heal the wounds. So the threat from Naruto was small and ridiculous, and therefore was ignored. The security guards reacted much worse to the sudden silence. This meant that Naruto had planned another dirty trick, as a result of which they would have a lot of trouble and work. If Naruto became quiet and began to look around, became the same as everyone else, a normal, unremarkable child, then somewhere at the very edge of his field of vision, faceless ones would immediately crawl out, closely watching his every action. If Naruto noticed them, then for some reason he did not pay attention, considering them an empty space, just like the Uchiha clan police openly standing on electric poles. It must have been hypnosis, Ikemaru thought, going through his memory and finding many similar moments. The threat of being exposed was serious. So, in order to stay in character, Ikemaru started the day with actions that were completely unusual for him, but normal for Naruto. "Yes. I'm awake!" He screamed at the top of his lungs and jumped out of bed. "Fear me!" Ikemaru felt like an idiot. But it was necessary so that he wouldn't be suspected. Normal behavior was too suspicious for someone like Naruto. Ikemaru was sure that Naruto should constantly try to stand out, and that Konoha had some pretty good analysts who could spot any discrepancy in behavior. So Ikemaru acted like any orphan who grew up without a good upbringing and constantly strived to remove this strange feeling of loneliness that settled in his chest. An orphan who had no childhood friend, no one, who had only one simple and favorite food that perfectly suppressed hunger and stress. And this food is now not persimmon, but ordinary ramen, given out with a coupon in an ordinary diner. Ikemaru looked around and was stunned, his mouth hanging open as he surveyed his surroundings. He really didn't care, but he didn't want to break out of his role as a naive child. So far naive, he thought. I'll still remember everything to those who starved him, so that his body looks 4 years old. Ikemaru suppressed an anticipatory smile. It was too unbecoming for a small boy, especially since it was so similar to a fox's. Observers, if there were any, might get the wrong idea. Naruto got up early and was always cheerful. After all, belonging to a great clan affected his endurance in a positive way, thanks to which there was a feeling of constant cheerfulness in his body, which Ikemaru was extremely happy about. After all, in his past life, every awakening for him was hellish and sophisticated torture. His body, unlike Naruto, was incredibly sluggish and weak immediately after sleep. Ikemaru had to force himself to get out of bed and also force himself to do things, making such an expression on his face that Kira's Lenten mug would seem very optimistic in comparison. One day, Aizen found out about this and got into the habit of coming to him early in the morning, taking tea and lemons with him. He made such a complacent face that Ikemaru could not refuse him a joint tea party. With lemons, which Aizen, inadvertently, overdid with a sincere smile, regretting it. In order not to be left alone with this tyrant, Jin invited his lieutenant in the morning. And before each invitation, late in the evening, he loaded him with urgent work, and in the morning he sincerely enjoyed his expression during early morning tea. After all, it was impossible to refuse 2 captains. Well, those were fun times. Ikemaru had traveled a lot since he was a child. Being an orphan, without a mother or father, he was very envious of those who had them. He was envious and knew it. But he suppressed this feeling, saying that he was above it. He suppressed all feelings except the feeling of superiority and boredom. These 2 feelings could not be gotten rid of, which resulted in him starting to bully those around him. He began to laugh at them, looking for their weaknesses and pushing them outward. In order to have a weighty argument in his disputes and conflicts, he trained a lot. He did not want to be beaten for his words. He became stronger than ordinary souls and mocked them. It brought great pleasure, until it became boring. Boredom began to weigh on him again. He needed a goal. He found it when he met Ranjaku. A normal lifelong goal. To protect someone weaker than you. To take an ordinary soul from level 0, like a Shinigami, to the level of a captain. He began to care for her, even though she didn't know it. Then Aizen appeared. And in order to protect Ranjaku from him, Jin became a Shinigami and graduated from the Academy of Spiritual Arts. Life began to spin with interesting colors. New people, new secrets, battles, training, intrigues and conspiracies. You could have a lot of fun in the Godai. Then the betrayal and spying on the Godai, under Aizen's nose. It was scary, incredibly scary, and therefore incredibly exciting. He learned a lot about hollows and their evolution. He learned a lot about the Hogyoku. Espada. The 10 strongest Arankar, symbolizing the 10 causes of death. The strongest cause of death was loneliness. Then came time, immediately followed by sacrifice, indifference and despair. Last came destruction, intoxication, madness and greed. And so on until the 10th cause, rage. The most symbolic was that Ikemaru was stronger than them, as was Aizen. Together they symbolized boredom, a feeling capable of overcoming any living being. Ikemaru emerged from his memories, boredom overcoming him again. Rounding the small nightstand next to the bed, Jin pulled the curtains aside and opened the window, taking in as much air as he could. It was late at night outside, threatening to turn into early morning any minute. Ikemaru didn't want to miss out on such a good chance to cheer himself up without breaking out of the canon Naruto image. Ichigo, help me, share your chakra. A snore came from the cage. On Wi-Fi. Ichigo. All night long, poor Kurosaki ran away from Shinso, who was chasing him through the labyrinth, and wanted to squeeze him to death. It was hard for him, a red-haired man, to hide in the contrasting green light of the corridor, so he made the most desperate attempt. There was no other way out. All his Ryatsu had run out when he used his super mode, so now he could not pose a danger even to the most wretched hollow. He fell under the water in places due to the lack of Ryatsu, swam, got tired, but continued to hide, just to avoid the deadly embrace. Wet, with drooping black whiskers, red ears and tails, presenting a pitiful, but surprisingly cute sight, Ichigo slowly walked, looking for a place where he could rest from the pursuit with his big pitiful eyes. He thought that he had broken away from Shinso, and did not even imagine that he was walking towards her. She, seeing such a pitiful picture, was stunned and for a second felt sympathy mixed with a feeling of shame, which was immediately swept away by a wave of sympathy and cuteness. Ichigo. Go to mommy! Shinso smiled just like her master, narrowing her eyes like a fox. Her snow-white dress was disheveled, and a blush appeared on her cheeks. Ichigo. Ikamaru once again tried to shout to his neighbor. Ea! Ichigo woke up with a start and approached the bars. He looked carefully at the golden bars and the toilet paper wrapped around them, then exhaled heavily and sat down on the chair made of white particles, glad he had enough strength to do so. The seal was intact, the bars were thick, there was no need to worry, Shinso would not be able to penetrate his hideout. Near the cage, leaning against one of the giant golden rods, Shinso lay on the green surface of the water. Even in sleep, she retained a fox-like expression on her face. Her white hair was frayed, like her kimono, and there were small scars on her arms. Transforming her hands into blades, she tried to break through the bars, but she could not. Each time, an invisible barrier pushed her back, inflicting terrible wounds, but the Zanpakuto seemed not to notice them, and continued its actions. Only occasionally did she allow herself to rest, stitching up the wounds with a spiritual thread. What are you yelling about, Ikamaru? Ichigo asked, crossing his legs and resting his cheek on his hand. Share your chakra, Ikamaru said cheerfully. Ichigo didn't immediately understand what Ikamaru was talking about. Somehow recalling yesterday's events, he had a hard time understanding what kind of chakra Ikamaru was asking for. After all, being in a super form, he didn't even think about sorting the memory he had received, which he was suffering from now, being an ordinary, incapable spirit half-kitsune. I can't, Ichigo replied, shivering in the white chair. I spent not only my spiritual energy on my super form, but also the fox's energy. Ikamaru exhaled, and a hot cloud of steam escaped out the window. It seemed he had missed his chance to cheer up the people who hated him. However, he did not remain sad for long, and so he took another deep breath and screamed. 4 o'clock in the morning. A heart-rending scream is heard over Konoha, which is taking on a bizarre appearance in the darkness. I will become Hokage. Ikamaru could feel the spiritual fires all over Konoha waking up and emitting hatred. A truly terrible hatred that brought a satisfied smile to Ikamaru's face. And somewhere deep inside his inner world, in the cage, Kurosaki felt a surge of strength with surprise. Ikamaru remembered his past life again. It caused a slight pang of pain in his heart. He wanted to go back and correct all his mistakes. He wanted to see Matsumoto again, even if it was impossible. He left his new bedroom and went to the kitchen, found tea with difficulty and brewed it. Having found a bowl, he took out candies and put them in it. And already climbing onto a chair, not caring at all that he was being watched, he slowly sipped the tea and put the candy in his mouth. It was not at all like what had happened then, with Aizen. It's okay, Kurosaki, we have a chance to become gods even then. Ikamaru smiled even more, baring his teeth. He was not leaving the feeling of euphoria from the idea that came to his mind. And then we will turn back time and correct all the mistakes of our past life. Wait for me, Ranjaku. This time, I will not leave you anywhere. Repeating everything from the beginning, knowing everything in advance, will be very interesting. The office was always filled with tobacco smoke. It was so thick that when the secretary tried to air it out, it wouldn't leave the room. But this smoke had one peculiarity. It would dissipate as soon as Hiruzen, an old man with a white goatee, wished for it to. And this smoke wasn't always visible. Sometimes it became completely transparent, giving its owner invisibility in return. Sometimes it simply hovered near the ceiling, hiding a group of faceless shinobi in masks, who were the capture team. The smoke could intoxicate, deceive, or become a weapon. But the smoke was weak and had no effect against strong shinobi. Hiruzen, a wrinkled man with a black hedgehog hair on his head, a bandaged right eye and a cross-shaped scar on his chin, appeared from the shadows in the corner. He leaned on a stick and seemed decrepit, but incredible strength and power emanated from his single golden eye. "Hello, Danzo." Hiruzen nodded politely, without taking off his red triangular hat. "Why did you decide to visit me?" "Uzumaki Naruto," Danzo said. "Itachi complained that he couldn't cast Genjutsu on him. You know what that means. You think the Jinchuriki will be hard to control?" Hiruzen asked, puffing on his pipe. "What are you implying?" "I'm hinting that another, more reliable vessel is needed," Danzo replied. "You and I both know that he hasn't used the beast's power yet. Don't worry, Minato's son will live." Silence fell. Clouds of smoke floated around the room, slowly driven by air currents. They floated past objects, creating thin threads and intertwining with each other. They floated past the scrolls with assignments, past the rack on which these scrolls were, past the unlit candle, near the ceiling, past the electric lamps, and then descended again, onto the old oak table, falling like an invisible waterfall onto the floor. "Danzo, why did you give up the idea of taking him in?" Hiruzen asked unexpectedly. "For the same reason I didn't take Might Guy to heart," Danzo answered calmly. "The boy is too bright, he can be deceived and sent against the village. A man like him can't be a weapon for the village. Danzo, the elders are not aware of the situation, they will be against it," Hiruzen answered, puffing on his pipe. "You know yourself, they never understood the philosophizing of our teachers, they were more practical people. For them, Naruto is just another vessel and an instrument of pressure on other villages. They will never take into account his feelings and desires." "That's just your stupid excuse, Hiruzen," Danzo replied. "We can erase the memories of everyone in the village at any time and reseal the demon into a person loyal to us." "Minato will be against." "Minato is dead," Danzo replied. "And he never wanted this fate for his son. We must reseal the demon before it is too late." "So who do you suggest to replace him?" "Tenzo," Danzo replied. "He would be a great fit as a Jinchuriki and loyal to you and the village." "No," Hiruzen answered. "Then I'll do it differently," Danzo replied. "I'll accept him into the root. There the boy will get used to it and quickly become obedient." "No," Hiruzen answered again. "I know your methods. I'm not going to use them," Danzo replied. "I'll just show him our work. And then he'll decide for himself whether to be in the root or not. Do whatever you want, my friend, but don't harm Naruto," the Hokage replied. Danzo silently measured Hiruzen with his gaze and turned around. Slowly, leaning on his cane, with the maximum speed for him, he dissolved into the shadows and disappeared from the office. Hiruzen looked at the place where Danzo stood for a long time, puffing on his pipe. He understood perfectly the idea that came to his old friend's mind and could not disagree with this idea. Quietly chuckling, he put the pipe down and brought the scrolls with the reports closer to himself. The Hokage still had a lot of work to do. They both did not yet know what problems this undertaking would turn into for them, what kind of problem Uzumaki Naruto would become. He spent a whole day asking Ichigo about his god mode. In the end, it turned out that it was somewhat similar to the godlike mode before using the final Getsuga Tensho, in exchange for absorbing a huge amount of energy, be it spiritual energy or life energy. When their home world was collapsing, Ichigo activated this mode in the hope that it would find a solution. And he found it, following Ikamaru's mind to Naruto's world, where he subjugated the local Shinigami and resubjugated the seal in which the demon was sealed, fishing out the necessary information from the Shinigami's head and binding the seal to himself. Then, feeling a lack of energy, he merged with the fox and sealed himself with his own seal in order to be tied to this world. At least, that's all Ichigo understood from his godly actions. He was thinking at too high a level then. He spent the fox's chakra on talking to Ikamaru and reassigning his Zanpakuto, and then his mode deactivated, exhausting all available energy reserves. Ichigo was now something between a demon, a god, a Quincy, a Shinigami, a hollow, a shinobi, and a human. His chakra was now at the level of an ordinary genin, and it would take him about 2 years to restore it to its previous level. Bless me, Ichigo, guide me on the true path, so that it will lead me to Tsunade's breasts. Since then, Ikemaru, having learned of Ichigo's divinity, together with Shinso, came to his cage every evening and began to pray to him. Thus, through prayer, they replenished his spiritual reserve. O Lord Ichigo! Condescend to me, a mortal and insignificant girl, let me touch your divine face. Shinso prayed next to her, right after her master. Each prayer transferred a certain amount of energy to Kurosaki Ichigo. And the more sincere the prayer, the more energy was transferred to him. But in exchange for this energy, Kurosaki received a contract that he had to fulfill so that the energy would be personalized, become part of his own. Go to hell! I won't get out of the cage! Ikemaru! One more joke like that and when I get your powers back, you'll seriously regret being born. Ichigo cursed Ikemaru heartily for praying for things that Ichigo physically could not do. Every time Ikemaru prayed, his hollow would have to absorb that energy, causing Kurosaki unbearable pain for not fulfilling the wishes of those who believed in him. The Lord God is not in a good mood today, Shinso. He is sending curses upon us. What should we do? Ikemaru asked. We must pray more, sir. And someday he will descend to us. Okay, Ikemaru, let's end the comedy. Ichigo closed his eyes and sat in the lotus position, placing his short black katana on his knees. I accept your plan, but only with amendments. We won't be taking all the power. Okay, Kurosaki, I'm going to bed. Tomorrow will be a hard day. Ikemaru walked past the eateries, looking for his next victim for mental abuse. No, he didn't want to mock her or delve into her mind, he just wanted to test the work of the canonical Uzumaki brain drain. And so, looking around the street through narrowed eyelids, he found his first test subject. She was sitting in an open-air cafe at one of the many tables where dango was sold, and eating buns. The victim did not pay any attention to him until he approached her and stood in front of her, smiling slyly. Boy, I don't do charity work, the girl said, looking at him. Tell me what you need or get out of here while you're still in one piece. Ikemaru waited. He continued to look at her. He stood in front of the girl and smiled a fox-like smile. The 3 whisker stripes on his cheeks curved slightly, and his eyes narrowed, intensifying the already cunning expression on his face. His blonde hair swayed slightly in the wind. Hello, Anko-san, could you become my mother? Tea started to flow from the nose of the frivolously dressed girl he was addressing. She gurgled something unintelligible, began to choke and fall to the side. Ikemaru had timed the moment perfectly when she began to wash down her bun with tea. Having spilled her entire simple breakfast on the ground, she cleared her throat with tears in her eyes and looked at the boy. What? Are you crazy? Me? Your mother? Well, considering that you are the only one who survived my proposal, then my words make sense. Ikemaru smiled even wider. He was confident of success. Oh yeah, that's funny. Anko snorted and took out a napkin. Get out of here before I give you a slap on the wrist for ruining breakfast. Okay. Ikemaru put his hands in front of him and walked away. He felt how the uncontrollable life force emanating from him was slowly beginning to permeate the surrounding world. Another 7 years and this entire village would be permeated with his energy, allowing it to influence the minds of the people in it. A kind of mental subordination, which is usually used by higher-level hollows on the weak, allowing their energy to penetrate their bodies. He studied this aspect well with Aizen, and therefore was not surprised how in the canon the enemies defeated by Naruto accepted his point of view. And he was not surprised that Madara, who was slightly stronger than Naruto, almost pulled him over to his side. Yeah, and I thought Aizen was crazy, offering to switch sides in the middle of a battle, putting pressure on me with his Ryatsu. Ichigo said, reading Ikemaru's surface thoughts. But why didn't it work on Anko then? Orochimaru. Ikemaru answered briefly. We must first displace his energy, and only then try to influence it. Then what should we do? Ichigo asked. Shall we offer Hinata to become our mother? Ikemaru suggested innocently. KH. The girl is kind and gentle. Is something wrong? Okay, let's go to the market. We need to do some shopping. Ikemaru, in Ichigo's thoughtful silence, walked along the main road of Konoha, looking for trouble. There were very few people on the dusty road of the main street, and so he soon turned onto one of the small streets that went off to the side. On this street, where he turned, a market had appeared a week ago, where all the merchants who came to Konoha went first and sold perishable goods at a very low price. The goods lay right on the boxes, there were no counters, at best they sold from a cart or from a bench. The market was quite lively, trade on it was brisk, which ensured a constant flow of fresh goods and gave a huge amount of money to the merchants, who saved on renting a special room, which in turn greatly reduced the prices. Ikemaro knew that it was at such markets that more or less rich people who liked to rattle ringing coins shopped. Suddenly, someone pushed Ikemaro, which he immediately took advantage of. Smiling broadly, he prepared himself to listen to curses and turned towards the impudent man. In front of him was a belly. Raising his gaze a little higher, he saw a corpulent, bushy-browed man who was looking at him with incredible coldness in his eyes. "What are you standing there for, brat? Get out of my way!" The man wasn't angry, although he feigned displeasure. Ikemaro could see very well that he felt good about pushing the strange boy and that he couldn't do anything to him. How unlucky he was, because it was Ikemaro. "Thank you, uncle!" Ikemaro bowed low. The man standing before him hung his head, trying to understand what he had heard. "Eh? Thank you, uncle, for your good deed." Ikemaro bowed once more, stretching out a wide smile and began to walk sideways, dissolving into the crowd. Finally, he couldn't resist and raised a leather pouch in front of his face and shook it, continuing to look into the man's face. It was his wallet. "Stop the thief!" It was too late to shout, Ikemaro had already escaped. The market was spontaneous and outside the village laws, not covered by police protection. So no one could stop crimes like theft, and the shinobi on guard only stopped fights and battles, not interfering in other conflicts. Jumping over the fence, almost flying into the sky due to the unusually large amount of power, Ikemaro landed in the bushes and immediately took off his henge, throwing on another one. Now he was an ordinary little girl in a lilac kimono, who simply decided to take a walk around the village while her parents were busy. As soon as he stepped out into the open, he was immediately grabbed by the chest. It was the same man, only more out of breath and tired. "You're a shinobi. I know your tricks," Ikemaro squealed. The man let go of his clothes in surprise and he immediately twisted away, hitting the man between the legs. He immediately doubled over. "Pervert! Run! There's a pervert here!" There was a noise and hubbub. All the people looked in their direction, some started to shout indignantly, and some didn't pay attention. Ikemaro quickly ducked into the crowd and ran, skirting numerous houses. Carefully removing henge in one of the gateways, Ikemaro winced from the stench. "Uzumaki Naruto!" A quiet, elderly voice that conveyed power and strength. Ikemaro turned around. Behind him stood an older man with a cross-shaped scar on his chin and 2 deep wrinkles around his mouth. His short black hair stood up straight, tied with bandages that hid his right eye, and in his left hand he held a cane on which he leaned. But Ikemaro knew very well that the cane was more for show. "Ah. Eh? And who are you, Databeo?" "Danzo," the one-eyed man answered briefly. "Head of counterintelligence." "Wow. Really?" Ikemaro smiled. He realized how he could drive people crazy without ruining Naruto's image. "What is this? A store like this?" "Not exactly," Danzo answered. Ikemaro noted that he had rather strong nerves and they would not be taken so easily. "We are an organization that protects Konoha and helps future Hokage. You want to become Hokage, right?" Bribery. It would be trivial if he wasn't impersonating Naruto. Ikemaro will have to agree. There is an organization in Konoha, ANBU. Ikemaro thoughtfully closed his eyes, and Danzo tensed up. "So there is another organization, also ANBU. Naruto." Danzo's gaze suddenly became cold. "Who told you about this?" "Well, that's easy." Ikemaro smiled again. "It's like hot springs. There are ones for women, and ones for men. If there's a male ANBU, then surely there's a female one? Are you in charge of the female one? What do you sell? Don't act like an idiot, boy, I see right through you. I suggest you become strong, so strong that you are recognized, and it is up to you to decide whether to accept this offer or not." If you accept, then we will meet in a week at Ichiraku Ramen, the old man said and disappeared into thin air. And what should I do, Lord Ichigo? Ikimara said pathetically, realizing that no one was watching him. Teach me the right path. Why are you silent? Ichigo didn't speak for a long time. He usually made sarcastic comments about Ikimara's actions, snapping at Shinso and complaining about the excessive dampness. Ikimara-sama, Shinso replied. Ichigo has fallen into a divine sleep. Shit, Ikimara said calmly. This will take a long time. Ikimara silently walked out of the gateway, thinking about existence. He could have refused Danzo's offer, but such a decision smelled like a setup. This old man would not calm down until he was sure that he had control over the weapon. And Ikimara was absolutely sure that he was perceived exactly like that. Having bought several dozen plates of ramen from the good-natured Tuchi, Ikimara with a calm soul headed to his house, where he lay down on the bed and began to drill his eyes into the ceiling. It was necessary to somehow solve such a problem, or even overthrow this old man. It would be nice to gain a reputation with the local population before that, so that they would support him in the event of Danzo's overthrow, but Ikimara did not know how to do such things. And he did not want to get involved in this jar of spiders, he really did not want to. I need shadow clones and lots of connections, lots of them. But first I need weapons. Shinso, are you recovered? No, I still have a year before I can materialize, she replied. Master, come to me. I am lonely. Master, subjugate me again. I see, Ikimara answered her. However, he could not lie like that for long, and so he closed his eyes and began to meditate. Control over energy, that was what he was struggling with. The energy was hard, incredibly hard and material, like the world itself. The shinobi world was much more material than even the world of the living, where he came from. Ikimara understood that Yamamoto's flame in this world would be weak, very weak, relative to this world, and there was simple evidence of that. Amaterasu. Fire so hot that it burns matter. Fire, somewhat reminiscent of the energy of the final Getsuga Tensho, fire granted by divine power. The volume that Itachi released in canon, in the battle with his brother, would have been enough to burn the entire Tsurugi. Yes, the Shinigami were strong, but no one could resist this fire for the simple reason that they were not gods. After all, Ryatsu is not exactly divine energy, it is only an echo of divine energy. Chakra. The energy that the ancestors took from God, torn out with a long fight and suffering, for their descendants. Ikimara tried to learn to control it. This world was stronger, this world was more complete, not torn into several pieces, like the last one. In this world there were no empty ones, there was no God who would maintain balance. This world lived on its own, not depending on any entity, not tied to anyone. Only in this world could one become a god, but to do this, one had to first learn to control the power, and then defeat the local Shinigami, who in appearance strongly resembled Hagoromo Otsutsuki. Very strongly. All the following days, he spent in training, not even noticing the admission to the academy. It was just that one day he was confronted with the fact that he would study there. Ikimara was not particularly indignant, supporting the legend of Naruto gradually becoming smarter, getting more and more involved in everyday life. He refused Danzo's offer, honestly answering that he wanted to go the same way as the previous Hokage, namely to study at the academy and then, having received Chunin, work in ANBU. Danzo was angry, but did not show it. Apparently, the old man was in a bad mood, since he needed strength for some reason, or maybe the bookmarks that he had already tried to put on him several times through ordinary conversation were to blame. It is unknown. The training was terrible. Ikimara, having learned that his body recovered quite quickly, even much faster than the spiritual one, understood perfectly well that his body was different from the usual, human one. Each time he ran a huge amount of chakra through his body and was very surprised by its strength. The same Jigai easily wore out even with a small release of Ryatsu, and Naruto's body withstood not only his own, but also Ryatsu and Ichigo's chakra, which fed him with a thin stream. And in general, Ikimara was surprised by the very fact that Ryatsu can be sent through the body in almost any direction other than arteries and veins, as the Quincy do. Testing the body for strength, he felt how this body only becomes stronger and stronger. The body was incredibly pliable. During one of the training sessions, Ikimaru accidentally noticed that if you feed your hand enough chakra, then you can bend or deform it within certain limits, not exceeding the strength of the drink with the chakra of this hand. Moreover, it was possible to deform only with chakra, and this deformation disappeared very quickly if you lost control for a second. But Ikimaru did not even suspect how much the Uzumaki body was pliable to the soul. Waking up one morning, he didn't recognize himself in the mirror. Or rather, he did, but he didn't expect to see something like this. "Shinso, do you see the same thing as me?" "If you mean the white silky hair, then yes," Shinso answered. Ichigo simply stopped feeding his body with his energy, gradually forcing the body to get used to the lack of this type of energy. Scribe. The conspiracy went to hell. A white-haired, bleached Naruto with his familiar facial features was looking at him from the mirror. For some reason, the white setsu and his ability to change appearance under the influence of someone else's chakra were spinning in his head. Ikimaru stood in front of the mirror, disbelievingly feeling his chest, and then chuckled and interrupted the flow of energy from his Zanpakuto. His face became more boyish, his chest became smaller, his silver hair became shorter, and his narrow fox-like smile and the shape of his eyes became more graceful. Only 3 furrows running along his cheeks and depicting a mustache reminded him of the former Uzumaki Naruto, as well as his light blue eyes. The energy of his Zanpakuto did not solve the problem of returning to his previous appearance, but only aggravated it, turning him into a girl. However, Ikimaru was not so saddened by this fact. He was thinking about something else, about how this could be used. How can one use his new old appearance? After some thought, Ikimaru smiled in anticipation, imagining the shock, disbelief, and despair that would be on the faces of others who met on his way. What did Ikimaru decide to do? He decided to flaunt what couldn't be hidden. He decided to flaunt his appearance. If you can't stop, then lead. If you're in an incomprehensible situation, then act as if that's how it should be. Muhahahaha. Now I will definitely become Hokage. Ikimaru raised his hands to the ceiling and began to laugh loudly, so that everyone around his house could hear it. The first thing Ikimaru did was check his stash. If he was going to change his appearance, he was going to change it drastically, right down to his clothes. He pulled out a wallet in the shape of a huge toad from under the nightstand, counted out a few bills and put them in his inside pocket. After looking around the apartment, he quickly put the kettle on to boil and went to wash up, and then, at the same fast pace, filled his stomach with ramen stew. He had to hurry before the academy opened, even though he got up early, but that day he spent most of his time experimenting with his appearance, or rather, identifying the dependence of his appearance on the energy flowing through his body. The dependence was strong, but not so much as to interrupt the characteristic genetic traits inherent in this body. Unfortunately, from the experiment with Shinso's energy, it turned out that this dependence also extends to gender characteristics. To put it simply, the energy flowing through the body changed the appearance of the body to what this energy was accustomed to. Only the mustache and irises of the eyes remained untouched, but he did not understand why this was so. Ikimaru emerged from his thoughts near the door and, having locked it from the inside, hung the key around his neck. It was time to go to the market, which he did, jumping out of the window at great speed and covering the distance to the nearest shopping arcade to his house in 2 jumps. Disgruntled curses at the jumping idiot shinobi were heard behind him, but Ikimaru ignored them, looking for an inconspicuous awning where he had previously noticed a simple but sturdy kimono. Having stood in a small line of 3 men and 1 woman in closed uniforms with masks on their faces, he approached the counter and stood opposite the saleswoman. The saleswoman was a short girl dressed in a short green kimono. Shaking her red hair, she stared at his face with her green eyes. For some time, the girl tried to recognize him, going over in her memory the faces of all her customers, and only a glance at his clothes helped her understand who was standing in front of her. "Good afternoon, Naruto-san, and you have changed." The girl smiled politely, turning slightly pale. It was hard not to recognize the boy who was constantly hanging around her shop in these clothes. It was hard not to recognize the monster that scared her in childhood, and the monster that destroyed Konoha before her eyes. That mustache, that smile, those narrowed eyes, all of this caused her an incomprehensible horror. Ikimaru smiled even wider. "The count is open. The first victim of the day." I see you're not happy to see me, Teriyaki-san, you've upset me. Ikemaru removed his smile and frowned slightly. What if I tell you out of grief about how you told me who I really am? Huh? Sorry. The girl recoiled. Even though everyone was talking about what a demon Naruto was, she had once accidentally let it slip that his father, a hero and the fourth Hokage, should have killed him for destroying Konoha. And if the previous Naruto hadn't paid attention to it, then Naruto Ikemaru actively used her words as blackmail and intimidation. I'm very glad to see you. Oh. There's no need to apologize to me, Teriyaki-san. I wasn't that offended. Ikemaru cheerfully raised his hand. After all, some of this body's reflexes remain the same. Here. Sell me that kimono. Still, Ikemaru didn't like to go overboard and be so sarcastic with people. Besides, he didn't really want to mock the poor girl who lost her parents during the fox's attack and was therefore afraid of him. And he also didn't want to spoil the shaky relationship that Naruto had created with the only saleswoman who sold him clothes at normal prices. The previous Naruto saw very well how this girl lived on the brink of poverty, barely making ends meet, and therefore occasionally helped her, arranging for the damage of goods to her competitors. Ikemaru continued Naruto's work. However, he did this not so much out of the nobility inherent in Naruto, and not so much out of revenge, but out of a purely strange feeling of curiosity. He wanted to see how this girl's attitude towards him would change if he continued to help her, at the same time occasionally scaring her. Will she get used to him, stop being afraid, or, on the contrary, hate him so much that it will overcome her fear and she will start raising prices, like the other traders? Here you go. Teriyaki handed him the goods, wanting to get rid of the company of such a hateful and terrible creature to her. Ikemaru replied, counting out a little more than she was supposed to and taking the kimono. Here's the change. I don't need your pathetic handouts. Ikemaru chuckled and turned around, pretending to leave. Hearing the girl gnashing her teeth and taking the change for herself, he immediately turned around, making an incredibly cunning face. Although, I don't think I'll refuse. A deserted study, 2 low tables, an open window, white paper walls and a polished, varnish-stained floor. Nothing superfluous, nothing that would distract the Hokage from his work. Hiruzen sat in a chair at one of the tables and sorted through a large pile of reports on the shinobi's work. The white papers were covered with many hieroglyphs, and some were simply covered with a strange set of lines and dots. Adjusting the folds of his suit, the red bottom of which reliably hid a special ninja suit, Hiruzen turned his gaze from the documents to the floor in front of the table, as if expecting something. A second later, a whirlwind of green leaves appeared out of thin air in that place. Hokage-sama! The whirlwind disappeared, revealing a man dressed in a thick gray cloak with a strange carnival mask on his face, the red stripes on which depicted an unknown beast. However, Hiruzen immediately recognized him, as well as the owner of the mask, who was hiding under it. It was Kot, one of his close associates in ANBU, who was watching the Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed. What happened? Hiruzen pushed some of the papers away from him, picked up a long black pipe and opened a carved snuff box. He filled the pipe with a deft, unnoticeable movement, and prepared himself to listen to bad news, since other ninja watching the Jinchuriki could not bring it. Naruto used an unknown technique that changed his appearance. Here are the photos. The guy, who was a member of ANBU, pulled out several sheets of paper from his bosom and put them on the Hokage's desk. Hiruzen almost choked on his pipe. The photo showed a completely white, fox-like boy, who stretched his face into a mad smile and, judging by his arms spread out to the side, was laughing demonically. The fox tried to break free? What happened to him? These were the first thoughts that flashed through his head. But deciding not to rush into things, Hiruzen took a heavy drag, calming his heart that was jumping out of his chest. True, he still didn't feel the usual bitter smoke enveloping his lungs. What he saw shocked him so much that he forgot to light the tobacco. Show me, he said, looking up from the photographs. I need to see and hear what happened. Good. ANBU rose from his knees and formed a tricky construction with his hands. Illusionary screen technique. The Hokage stared ahead unfocused for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, thoughtfully puffing on his pipe with the tobacco still unlit, too busy with what he had seen to notice such a trifle. The ANBU removed his hands and stood up again in a kneeling position, awaiting instructions. Now, Hiruzen emerged from his thoughts, frowned and brought his finger to the bowl, whistling from his strained drags. A moment and a flame burst from the tip of his finger, igniting the smoking mixture. So he wants to become Hokage. He created a strange technique. I see. Hiruzen looked at the ANBU. Continue to monitor him and report any oddities. Do it. The ANBU disappeared in a whirlwind of leaves. Hiruzen felt himself becoming stuffy and sick. The usual tobacco smoke did not help to calm down, but only aggravated his anxiety. So, putting his pipe aside, he carefully stood up and went to the window, breathing in the fresh morning air. Naruto, what will you do next? I guess I won't be able to protect you from Danzo's attention anymore. He won't let something like this pass by. Uchiha Sasuke was completely naked in a very strange place, where there was no light, no sound, only a warm darkness enveloping all the senses. He was flying in this darkness with his eyes closed, and around him flew blurry clouds, in which vague images, torn from his memory, were visible. His brother, his home, his parents, classmates from the academy, and Naruto, an unusual boy with a sly fox smile. Suddenly, the space trembled and Sasuke opened his eyes, hanging in one place. His dark hair was scattered in zero gravity, and on his body appeared a black t-shirt, shinobi sandals and gray shorts. Where am I? He asked, putting his hands in his pockets with a familiar movement and looking around. You are sleeping, and this place is a world created by your mind, your spiritual power, astral power, an illusory world, like Tsukiyomi, but created by your mind. A quiet, indifferent voice sounded behind him. Sasuke turned around. Opposite him, in the air, sat a red-haired guy in a lotus position with strange eyes glowing with a purple film, from the pupil of which concentric wavy circles with dark comma-shaped holes running along them, 3 pieces per ring. On his knees lay a dark katana with a light dark haze emanating from it, which, like a liquid, slowly dissolved in the surrounding space, shining with white light. On his hands were the same gloves, created from dark haze, and on his body was a dark, like night, cloak dress, with a double, red and white lining and a white haori with short sleeves thrown over it, along the edges of which were depicted dark tomo. Sasuke was surprised that he did not feel anything from this guy, although even from his brother, hiding his strength, he felt a light current of energy. From any living being and any object that was very close to him, Sasuke felt a small flow of chakra. Even now he felt a weak energy coming from the white clouds with images, but not from the red-haired guy with a hedgehog-like hairstyle. Absolute emptiness, and a pulling feeling of his own chakra going nowhere. And don't try until you master the sage mode or master the creation of yin or yang, you won't feel anything. The red-haired guy quietly answered his silent question. Who are you? Sasuke asked, still not understanding anything the stranger had said about this place. It was too difficult to perceive his words, despite the fact that he had gotten the general meaning of the creature's words. Apparently, he was in some kind of illusion created by himself. Kurosaki Ichigo, God the Creator, the boy answered indifferently. I came here to give you the power that will allow you to become much stronger than Itachi. Sasuke looked at Ichigo for a long time, trying to comprehend his words again. But remembering that God had spoken about sleep, Sasuke decided that it was just a twist of his mind caused by genjutsu training, which his father had warned him about, asking him not to overexert himself. In vain he had disobeyed his father, and that was how he had gotten such a twist of his mind. It was good that it had happened in a dream. His father had told him how something similar had happened in reality, when a person who had overexerted himself with genjutsu training went crazy. So Sasuke simply relaxed and began to watch the rest of the dream, remembering his father's words about how to act in such situations. It was quite possible that in reality he was sleepwalking, and he would not want to crash into a wall or get hurt. And it is quite possible that he is in a torture genjutsu, and now they will try to find out information from him, which is unlikely, due to the fact that the interlocutor knows quite well about his relationship with his brother, and therefore knows everything else. So, this is a twist of his consciousness caused by excessive training. It certainly knows everything about him. Sorry, but I'm not a twist of your mind, Ichigo replied. But since it makes it easier for you to perceive what I'm telling you, then so be it. You offered me the power that would allow me to surpass Itachi. Why do you need that? It was stupid to ask yourself something like that. It was quite possible that the subconscious adjusted to the owner's desire to become strong. But it is impossible to exclude the possibility that Ichigo really is God. In that case, Sasuke's mistrust is justified by the fact that you can't trust entities that offer power just like that. There must be some kind of catch here. As I see, you are familiar with Naruto, who is my messenger in your world, Ichigo replied. Well, his body was recently taken over by the terrible fox-like death demon, and my avatar was also sealed in a seal. I am giving you power for a reason. You will have to gain the trust of this demon and at the right moment free my avatar from the seal. What if I refuse? Sasuke asked. He was tired of listening to this nonsense. Then this demon will destroy the world, just like you. What? How? Sasuke was surprised, completely forgetting that this was a dream. For a moment, the thought crept into his head that his dear brother Itachi would also die in this case. However, he immediately calmed down, remembering that this could not be believed without serious evidence. In addition, it could well have been a scent illusion. You can't trust any information in the real world, and even more so in the world of illusions. Since ancient times. Initially, chakra belonged to the ten-tailed god tree, which occasionally, once a millennium, performed a ritual of great synchronization with all people living on Earth, and took its chakra back, until people decided to take this chakra away. The first person who took chakra for herself was the princess of the Kagaya clan. She subjugated the ten-tailed and sealed it within herself, becoming the first Jinchuriki. Initially, people only had their own energy, mental and vital, incredibly concentrated and incredibly obedient to man, but everything changed since this princess subjugated the divine energy to herself, making it a part of herself. Chakra allowed man to go beyond certain limits, beyond which he could not go before. Why did Kagaya do this? She did this to stop the Great War, the ultimate goal of which, she thought, was the complementation and synchronization of all living beings into a new chakra fruit, into one higher energy substance. But she miscalculated that she herself became the initiator of this process, having absorbed all the power of hatred and cruelty of people. This idiot became the initiator of the redistribution of genetic material, as well as an incubator for a new generation of people. Stop! Sasuke stretched his hands forward, stopping the flow of noodles on his ears. There lived a god tree, and once every millennium it synchronized with all people. Why? In simple terms, he wanted to eat. It is a tree, and people are animals, so it exchanged chakra once every millennium, immobilizing everyone with genjutsu so that no one would steal its divine energy, quickly took the fruit of chakra, healed nature, people and dumped back, leaving in its place a useless material illusion that everyone worshipped, additionally supplying the tree with energy. Why did Kagaya need divine energy? Judge for yourself. Ordinary human energy is not capable of anything except strengthening the body or increasing physical indicators, not to mention turning into water, into stone or conducting lightning, flame through the body. Where have you seen a clanless person who managed to control elemental techniques as well as a clan member? Unless, of course, a clan member shares chakra or a piece of flesh with him? So Kagaya took this power from God to stop the war. And at the same time thinking that he is saving the world from the god tree, not knowing that something similar happens every millennium, and nothing bad has happened yet. Ichigo paused in his story, closing his strange eyes for a moment. Then he continued again. The tree god fulfilled its function, scanned the minds of all people, cured all genetic abnormalities and fell asleep, leaving the crazy Kagaya alone with her two sons, who owned the chakra of the tree god, and who would give impetus to a new generation of people. Realizing that she was brazenly fucked, both literally and figuratively, Kagaya decided to become a god herself, taking all the chakra back, but she miscalculated again. One of the sons, to whom the tree god, using his mother's body, fed a beautiful fairy tale and passed on all the knowledge about chakra, was able to seal the crazy mother and himself, becoming the second Jinchuriki. He shared the energy with the rest of the people, again starting the mechanism of eternal battle, and before his death, he sealed his mother's spirit in the moon, dividing the sleeping ten-tailed into 9 parts, which in turn was also the plan of the tree god. From what you said, it turns out that the tree allowed the chakra to be taken away? Sasuke asked again. Yes, Ichigo nodded. Remember, an ordinary mortal cannot defeat God unless he himself wishes it. I do not know all the plans of the God Tree, but the fact that over many millennia it decided to give people its chakra means a lot. However, I think the tree has accumulated enough chakra to evolve and quietly go to another plane, from where it conducts its affairs with the world of the living through its avatars, which are, as it were, parts of it. It is quite possible that after death, the souls of shinobi accustomed to using the energy of God go straight to his stomach, where they are slowly digested. Until the end of time or until resurrection. Ichigo closed his eyes again, driving away the obsessive thoughts about the Soul King and the Quincy King, preparing himself for further dialogue. However, this pause was needed not only by him, but also by Sasuke, who was slowly digesting the information laid out for him. So, the next and final complementation, according to the plan, should happen in a few years, but one small problem arose. One of the enemies from another world decided to kill the tree god with his spear and take his power for himself, destroying the world. This is Ikemara Jin. He is the one who has the power to destroy even gods, since he himself is a god, or rather the god of death, and owns the corresponding spear. Ikemara Jin? Sasuke asked, trying to understand at least a drop of what Ichigo had said. Yes. He took control of the body of my messenger, who is the Jinchuriki of one of the parts of the ten-tailed god tree, and sealed my avatar in a cage, threatening with the God-Slayer's spear, which he almost strangled me with, Ichigo answered, frowning. Sasuke thought that these memories were not the most pleasant for Ichigo, so he nodded understandingly for him to continue the story. He decided to interfere with the history of this world, capturing all the parts of the god tree and placing them inside himself, to find and destroy the real tree itself with the God-Slayer spear. I, Ichigo, the creator god, the protector, decided to prevent this, and that is why I sent the avatar into my messenger in advance. But as you see, this was not enough to stop Ikemaru, and so I turned to you for help, deciding to give you power. I offer you to protect the world from Ikemara Jin. I offer you the power to stop him at the right time. Do you agree? Yes. Sasuke nodded. Even if it was a dream, he didn't lose anything. And if it wasn't exactly a dream and he woke up strong in the morning, he didn't lose anything either. If you're not lying, of course. The light gods never lie, Ichigo replied. Sasuke began to feel negative about it, since Ichigo never answered the question of why he needed it, why Ichigo needed to save his world. What do you require of me? Sasuke asked. First, you need to gain his trust, become his friend. I'll tell you the rest later, and now take this. 2 red lights of chakra flew from Ichigo's hands, which immediately flew into his eyes, forcing Sasuke to cover them in pain. This is a special chakra, like that of the tailed beasts, part of the 10-tailed chakra. Now you are the Jinchuriki of this power. Be careful, if you use it too much, it is quite capable of destroying your chakra channels, destroying your body, to the point that your blood vessels will burst and your skin will tear. To get rid of such an effect, you will have to feed this power another power similar to this one. And also, this power, like the power of the tailed beasts, will put a lot of pressure on your mind, and also feeds on emotions. Be prepared for this, because now you are a Jinchuriki. See you later. Feeds on emotions? Wait! Sasuke exclaimed. Where am I going to find another power like that? To feed to my own? At my brother's. Ichigo smiled sadly and disappeared into the darkness. Sasuke opened his eyes and then closed them, feeling his head hurt from such an action. Slowly swaying, he got up from his bed and went to the mirror, slowly opening his left eye. It was dark, but he could see his reflection in the darkness perfectly. The boy reflected in the mirror was angry, like 100 Bijou, in whose only open eye the Sharingan was burning. His disheveled hair, even the night pajamas with kittens, all this emphasized his bad mood. Kill! The voice in his head whispered. Hate! Kill! It wasn't a dream. Your eyes can't hurt that much in a dream, and it can't happen in a genjutsu either. Sasuke remembered Ichigo's words about the pressure on the mind and tried to distance himself from the whispers in his head. It didn't work. And as soon as he removed the Sharingan, the pressure on the mind increased, so he had to put it back in place again, with a strange feeling as if he had pulled out a part of his soul for everyone to see. What kind of power is this? Sasuke opened his second eye with difficulty to make sure he wasn't imagining things. In his eyes, a Sharingan with 3 Tomo was burning brightly and burning everything with hatred. A full-fledged Sharingan, which occasionally trembled, and the Tomo were trying to change their shape, stretching out and merging with the central pupil, creating a strange pattern. They tried, but couldn't, but Sasuke perfectly predicted how the additional pupils would behave if he gave in to hatred and added a little more chakra. Sasuke felt an indescribable delight filling him. He just wanted to pour out his joy, but he held back, suppressing any impulses with his mind. Slowly closing his eyes, he calmed the raging emotions and stopped the supply of chakra to his head, which immediately exploded with pain, starting to pulsate in time with his heartbeat. The whispers and pressure on his mind disappeared, allowing him to think more soberly. However, all thoughts were immediately swept away by one, which unusually strongly inspired him and demanded that he train until he dropped, enjoying his new strength. He surpassed his brother. God gave him incredible power, which in theory should have been revealed to him much later. He awakened his Sharingan, shared his chakra and gave him the knowledge of a swordsman. The very basics, but it was enough to surpass everyone in his clan after just a week of training. Deciding not to put it off for long, Sasuke opened his eyes, threw off his pajamas and changed into the usual, everyday clothes that he wore in his dream. The clothes habitually wrapped his figure, protecting him from the cold of the surrounding air. The room was dark, but the light of the morning sky was enough to navigate the surrounding space. Quickly lacing up his sandals, he slammed the closet with clothes, ran past the mirror and opened the door, bursting into a narrow dark corridor. A few minutes later, he was on one of the clan training grounds waving a wooden stick, performing various pirouettes. Sasuke literally felt how his muscles were straining, tearing under the load and immediately recovering under the influence of chakra. Speed, agility and strength. These 3 parameters increased incredibly strongly as soon as he started training. A few minutes later, his whole body was unbearably itchy from the total restructuring of the body, but despite this, he continued to train until the training ceased to be effective and the spontaneous growth of skills decreased, or even disappeared altogether. Having swung the stick, run under the weights and swam underwater to his heart's content, Sasuke got tired and collapsed under the nearest tree, feeling growing hunger. The body, having adjusted to the new strength, demanded to restore the depleted resources. However, Sasuke did not waste time, overcame his slight laziness, stood up and headed to the low one-story mansion where he lived. His clothes dried quite quickly, and the dirt that had stuck to him immediately fell off as soon as Sasuke shook himself off a little, so he entered the kitchen clean and fresh. And then he was carefully picked up by the deceptively soft hands of his mother, who at that moment had already woken up and wanted to make breakfast. Sasuke simply adored the cooking of his mother, who made him lunch every morning and always wondered how early she got up, so he was not at all surprised that at such an early hour his mother was already on her feet. Now his mind was occupied with only one question: is it worth hiding his strength? And if not to hide, then how to explain where it came from? "Where have you been?" she asked. "I was training." Looking into his mother's eyes, Sasuke realized that he couldn't hide his increased strength from her, despite the fact that he might not explain where he got it from. He sent chakra to his head, feeling an increased sting in his eyes and a flash of pain in his head, as well as a surge of emotions and a pressing whisper on the edge of consciousness. The world became simple, clear and bright, and his vision began to notice many details. In a moment, the Sharingan faded. Mikoto pressed her son to herself and stroked his head. She didn't need to explain anything, she already understood a lot. "Don't overexert yourself and try to restrain your emotional outbursts." Mikoto ruffled her son's hair. "And I'll go cook something." "Okay, Mom, just don't tell Itachi, I want to surprise him." Sasuke smiled and headed to the bathroom to finally remove the traces of training. Fine. Already in the bathroom, standing under a hot shower, he remembered the task given to him by God. Today he had to get to know Naruto better, who was not really Naruto, but Ikamaru, and try to gain his trust. Sasuke did not want to check what would happen if he failed to complete the task, and therefore frantically tried to imagine how he would make friends with him, and whether there was a chance for him to impose an acquaintance. The problem was that Sasuke had no idea what friendship was, and even more so, what it was like to meet people, because in most cases he simply kept silent, not wanting to interfere in the relationships between people or simply ignored the person when he pestered him. What? Repeat, Shinso, did I hear you correctly? Ichigo created the Sharingan for Sasuke from the Ten Tails chakra? Ikemaro asked, freezing in front of the entrance to the Shinobi Academy. Well, that's what he told Sasuke. In fact, he didn't do anything, he just stupidly pulled the wool over people's eyes, like Aizen, and directed Sasuke's power along a certain path, like Hagyoku. He scared the child, put a light hypnosis on him with a mental bookmark that constantly puts pressure on his brain, and the rest was done by the power sleeping in him. Remember Aizen? He did the same thing, simply forcing the souls of hollows to restore themselves with hypnosis, and then securing the result of Hagyoku. Or remember how he made the Vizards? He forced the Shinigami to believe with hypnosis that they were turning into hollows, scared them, plunged them into despair or another emotional state, and then the soul, believing in all this, itself launched the hollowization mechanism, bypassing the Shinigami's powers. This is much different from when he tried to implant an alien power, and the souls died, rejecting it. Or remember how Urahara and Aizen, with the help of Hagyoku, intertwined fate so that a child was born from a Quincy subjugator, filled to the brim with the power of a poor, frightened Shinigami. Remember, the impossible hollowization right in the human body, which is also hypnosis and illusion. That's how Ichigo acted, essentially doing nothing, but chatting and influencing Genjutsu. The power itself awakened, under the influence of stress caused by the poisonous chakra of the nine-tailed, full of hatred, mixed with the rage of his hollow. There was little chakra at all and it was diluted with life energy, but it gave impetus to the awakening of Indra's power. He completely deceived Sasuke, essentially telling the whole truth? Ikemaro asked again, delving into what he heard. Well, yes, essentially he gave power, but very little and hanging hypnosis, exactly to give a push to the sleeping power. And he did not lie about the Ten Tails chakra, because initially he owned the Sharingan, and all the Uchiha are partially Jinchuriki of his hatred and eyes. Besides, the Nine Tails chakra is also the Ten Tails chakra. He simply told the truth, wrapping it in beautiful and incomprehensible words for Sasuke. I see. Only how he transferred the swordsmanship skills remains a mystery. And how he absorbed the fox, I also couldn't understand. Ikemaro sat down near the gate and plunged into the inner world, appearing right in front of the cage with Ichigo sitting in it on a white throne. The body of the red-haired boy, sleeping in an uncomfortable position, was wrapped in a white cloak, and his hands were shaking slightly, as if an electric current was passing through them. Ikemaro felt a huge amount of various energies seeping through the bars of the cage, and immediately disappearing to appear in the cage again. He was now so similar to Aizen during the initial stage of merging with Hagyoku, also sitting on the throne and sleeping, restoring his strength. I ended up in this world because I wanted it, and Hagyoku sent me, before its destruction, arranging a powerful surge of power, which allowed me to end up in this body. But how was Ichigo able to do this? When I was part of his divine form, Shinso stood next to Ikemaro and also looked at Ichigo. I felt echoes of the local Shinigami's power. It seems the hollow ate him on the way to this world, along with the fourth Hokage and the dark part of the fox. And you thought correctly, my master, the local Shinigami turned out to be a cast of the aura of some god. It seems that same Rakuto. It is not surprising that he easily got out of the seal and just as easily closed himself in it. What will you do after receiving such information? Nothing. Ikemaru's smile became mysterious. Master? Shinso looked at him in surprise. What do you mean by that? Absolutely nothing. I won't do anything reckless towards him. I'll just continue to gather strength to return back. I'll continue to help him gather strength, no matter who he really is. I'm worried about something else, Shinso. The smile on Ikemaru's face became completely cold. His narrowed eyelids trembled slightly. He turned to his Zanpakuto and extended his hand forward, pointing his index and ring fingers at her head. Since when did you stop understanding my actions? Shinso didn't have time to finish. A white lightning bolt burst from the fingertips of Ikemaru, who had suddenly become serious, and pierced her head, tearing her snake-like face apart and tearing off her silver hair. Path of Destruction Number 4, White Lightning. Shinso's fragile human form cracks into hundreds of white fragments and gathers into a greenish wakizashi on his belt, revealing a sheath of white snakeskin around it. Ikemaru stretches out a satisfied smile again and turns to the cage behind which Ichigo sat, lounging languidly on a white throne. Now that the haze had lifted, Ikemaru could clearly see the long red hair framing his eternally gloomy face, the trembling eyelids of his closed eyes, the black balls swinging behind his back, and the white and gold cape with a chain of black tomo along the edges. Ichigo was in divine mode. "Oi, Ichigo-san, how unfortunate!" Ikemaru approached the bars. "Forgive me for throwing your leash off my Zanpakuto. I didn't know it was you. You should warn me next time." "It was necessary," Ichigo replied. "I couldn't just trust you like that." "Need it?" Jin thought about what he had heard. Apparently, Ichigo had only just begun to trust him when he had followed his thoughts through the Zanpakuto. "So, meeting Sasuke is also necessary?" "Yes," Ichigo replied and disappeared, covering himself with the illusion of a nine-tailed fox. But Ikemaru continued to see, the illusion was not too strong, unlike the owner of this place. "Have you taken the path of lies and deceit?" Ikemaru wanted to stretch his satisfied smile even wider, but he failed. "In your time you were so angry when some meanness was happening, and now you yourselves." "Shut up, Jin. There's no point in stating the obvious." Ikemaru was more pleased than ever with such an emotional response. He managed to break through Ichigo's calmness in God mode. "I see. What about your power, Lord God? Do you need to pray?" asked Jin, wondering what other abilities Ichigo possessed. And what would be needed to strengthen these abilities. "No. I have accumulated the necessary energy due to chakra. All that remains is to deal with the local god and return to our world, reversing time." "Oh, yes. Is there anything else I need to know?" Jin asked. The eyes of the illusory Ninetails flashed a bright crimson light. Jin recoiled, feeling an incredible wave of hatred mixed with melancholy and a thirst for freedom. "There is another secret organization in Konoha. Don't get caught by them. It's unlikely that we'll escape their hands alive." Ichigo smiled under the illusion. "Now that's it, go." "As you say, Kami-sama." Jin smiled and bowed. "I'll do it to the best of my ability. And try to find a hobby, like I did once. It will help you relieve stress." "I've already found it." In an instant, Ichigo, hidden under the illusion, loses his divine mode, and his Zanpakuto appears next to Ikemaru. Fur, said the Zanpakuto, seeing the usual Ichigo behind the illusion, briskly jumped towards him and stopped, crashing into an invisible wall, between the bars of the cage. "Ichi-kun! Well, let me go." "Go to hell. You've eaten all my brains out." A child's voice was heard from behind the illusion. "And how do you see me through illusions?" "Let me go." "You're such a cutie when you turn off your divine mode." Shinso's cheeks turned pink. "Illusions are nothing compared to your cuteness." Yar, they're at it again." Ikemaru sighed heavily and left the inner world, dissolving into thin air. "But still, I'm glad that Ichi-kun found a hobby for himself, otherwise he could have lost himself in all these intrigues, as I almost did in my time," Ikemaru whispered, already in the outside world and looking around. Ikemaru froze, kneeling. Before his eyes was the most divine phenomenon, for which he had decided to forget about his lessons at the academy. Before him was his red-haired goddess. A ripe fruit with droplets of water covering its perfectly smooth skin. Ikemaru's face expressed genuine happiness, but few could understand it. There was no person in this world who was capable of doing so. A slight smile, silver hair falling over his eyes, constantly squinting eyes made it difficult to understand what feelings he was really experiencing. He didn't pay attention to the rain that began to pour down on the street, washing away the dirt and dust that had accumulated over the past few days. He didn't pay attention to the people looking at him askance and the swearing merchants. He didn't pay attention to his classmates returning from the academy. He didn't pay attention to the disgruntled Sasuke standing next to him. All his attention was focused on his goddess, whom he could contemplate 24 hours a day. "Persimmon," Sasuke said, then turned his gaze to the left of where Naruto had been looking, frozen. "Tomatoes." Two boys stood in the pouring rain, looking at the window of a newly opened store with admiring eyes. They stood there for only a short time until they noticed that they were soaking wet, and their clothes no longer kept them warm. Sasuke turned to Naruto, who silently turned around and slowly walked towards his house. Was all Sasuke could say, annoyed and realizing that he was left alone. Meanwhile, the real Ikemaru, wrapped in a cloak and holding an umbrella over his head, was carefully watching Sasuke's behavior. No one noticed him, not even the few ANBU who ran past him. Only the policemen on patrol occasionally glanced at him sideways, but they immediately stopped when Ikemaru stuck his tongue out at them, like children usually do when adults stare at them. It was incredibly strange, as if the world itself did not acknowledge Ikemaru's existence. "Poor Sasuke got wet in the rain," Ikemaru said. "I hope he doesn't catch a cold." The next week turned into a nightmare for Sasuke. He couldn't approach Naruto and talk to him, because it was incredibly difficult. He simply didn't know what to talk about or how to start a conversation. And Naruto himself complicated the situation, quickly leaving in an unknown direction as soon as Sasuke approached him. The Uchiha didn't even understand at what point Naruto disappeared from his field of vision. Meanwhile, Ikemaru was bored. There was an incredibly long time before the canon, when he would begin to act actively. Because of boredom, he developed an old habit of wandering among people, looking for trouble and simultaneously avoiding the search for his beloved girlfriend. But unfortunately, there was no beloved girlfriend from whom he could run, as well as troubles. And all because he began to be avoided by people who brought him these troubles or could bring them. This led him into incredible depression and despondency, which quickly spread to the people around him. Ikemaru touched his ear, which was warm from the rush of blood. To his great regret, his despondency therapy had been curtailed in the most radical way. For some reason, the police did not like the way he shared his feelings about his dull and boring life with people. They constantly interfered, interrupting his psychological sessions. What bad people! And the way they glare. Ikemaru was sad about the fact that he couldn't communicate normally with his classmates, because he was immersed in his studies, and in his free time he ran from Sasuke, who had strange intentions towards him. These intentions, whatever they were, scared the gentle and bright soul of Ikemaru. He was not ready for the kind of relationship that Uchiha Sasuke wanted from him, which he actively rubbed into his classmates in every free minute from the chase. To be honest, it was a time bomb, because while the girls he rubbed it into did not yet understand anything in his hints. But as soon as they get older. The main thing here is not to fall under this bomb yourself. "I'll definitely grow up." What was it that Matsumoto said? By Shounen? Maybe I should have hung out with her to understand her slang much better? Ikemaru asked. Still, I should have normal relationships with my classmates, instead of relying on a stream of information that overloads their small brains. Maybe I should make time for them? They'll be happy if they get to know me better. No, it's too early, they won't understand my jokes. Only occasionally did he notice how people from the root of ANBU were watching him. This was not surprising for Ikemaru. Strong people were always watched not only by intelligence, but also by counterintelligence, in order to protect these people from problems if necessary, or send them to prison in case of the slightest violation of the law on orders from above. But Ikemaru did not bother his head with such complex nonsense, he simply enjoyed life. For example, at the moment he borrowed a cart from a merchant for a while, stood on it, deftly balancing and forcing it to roll down the street, hoping that the disgruntled merchant would leave him alone and understand that he would return the cart sooner or later. But the merchant did not leave him alone, shouting various curses at him, calling him a demon, then an old moldy shoe. Hey! Move aside! The future Hokage Uzumaki Naruto is riding on a cart. And it was by pure chance that a one-eyed old man leaning on a wooden cane happened to be on his way. So what if Ikemaru had chosen this particular street for his fun when he saw this old man? It was just a coincidence, as always. There was no malicious intent. The one-eyed old man dodged quite quickly, as did the Hokage walking next to him, who was heading out on his own business, in order to traditionally visit the parents of this year's most talented graduates. Ikemaru rushed past them at great speed, jumped from the cart onto the roof of the nearest building and accidentally touched a bucket of paint left there. Well, there was no evil intent in the fact that the paint fell directly on two old men endowed with high power and standing near this building. It's sad, Ikemaru said, feeling his ear being squeezed in a steel vise. You're at it again, the girl said, looking at him with her Sharingan. I accidentally. However, this girl no longer listened to him, having handcuffed him and thrown him over her shoulder. Ikemaru could only joke about this and try to break free from her iron grip. How much he wanted the girl to be distracted by some handsome guy like Itachi, suddenly giving her flowers for example. Itachi can't give flowers, that secret organization is watching over it, Ichigo said. And anyway, relax, the main action is still far away. The most important thing is to wait until the Ten Tails is at the peak of its powers. What kind of secret organization is this? Ikemaru asked mentally. Could it really be that very? Yes, that one. Ichi came out of the cage. How could I miss this? Oh, sorry, the author can't talk about what's going on in Ikemaru's subconscious right now. Well, just a little bit. There are sweet moans and squeals. And also Kurosaki's blue face. Why not red? The author doesn't know and doesn't want to know. Ichigo. We remember. We mourn. Ikemaru sighed sadly when he was brought to the Hokage himself. Only he and specifically him were sent to him, to this unfortunate old man, for violations. Why unfortunate? Well, for some reason, Ikemaru's appearance after yet another prank greatly saddened Hiruzen. Very much. Here, I brought it to you. Sort it out yourself, Mr. Hokage. I don't want to talk to him anymore. The girl disappeared, moving with a strange technique. Ikemaru noted that she moved surprisingly fast, and also deftly used hypnosis to hide her direction of travel. Knocking a tree leaf made of spiritual energy off his shoulder, he smiled and turned to the Hokage. Have you ridden the cart? Hiruzen asked. Yeah. You almost knocked down my shadow clone? Yeah. You were passing by that shop with the blue roof and tripped there? Yeah. Where are the papers? Hiruzen asked. What papers? Ikemaru was genuinely perplexed by this. Really, what was this old man asking about? What papers? And why did Ikemaru's answer always make him sad? The first time Ikemaru had pulled a prank, the old man had almost fainted when he found out that Ikemaru had used those strange scribbles he had borrowed from a passerby to make a casing for water bombs. Well, yes, there had been a paper then, and many times later, he had privatized them for fun. Besides, they were easy to restore. But what papers now? So you didn't take them? Old man, are you deaf? If I had taken them, I would have immediately used them for my pranks. There was silence in the office. Hiruzen looked at Ikemaru, and Ikemaru looked at Hiruzen. They inhaled and exhaled slowly, realizing that losing such documents would have a serious impact on the village. Ikemaru already considered Konoha his new home, and so he felt his throat dry up, realizing that someone had just taken something secret from a foreign village. That he would be sent to war immediately, if there was one. Many things could happen. Yes, Konoha was not a very good place. But it was the place where Ikemaru lived, and where he was relatively free in his actions. This was his new home. Even if it was bad, he wouldn't be able to leave here without becoming stronger than he was now, since he would be immediately finished off and the tailed beast would be torn away by either Akatsuki or other villages. Losing important documents that could lead to a new series of conflicts, and in which he, as a Jinchuriki, would participate, was extremely undesirable. Old man, give me some valerian too. And most importantly, Ikemaru began to understand that he loves Konoha, that he really wants to become Hokage, that he must tell everyone about the will of fire. He was inspired by this. Just like he was once inspired to eat the sweet potato they hated, under the influence of Kyoka Suigetsu. And he also understood that he must return the documents. And he even knows where they are, he just needs to. Give me the documents first. What documents? Ikemaru was surprised again, to the laughter of Kurosaki Ichigo from the inner world. The river bank and a wide valley, with a mountain visible in the distance. Aizen Sasuke smiled softly as he walked through the short grass and immediately turned around, heading towards the nearest living being. He knew how he had ended up here, he knew where he was and how much longer he could remain incorporeal. A little more and he would dissolve into the world if he did not find a physical body. Knowing everything about this world in advance, he had already found his future vessel and was moving towards it at a leisurely pace. What a strong spiritual background in this world, Aizen said. And how few racial there are in this world. It seems there is no god in this world. It is decided that I will become the first god for this world. The dark hole behind him disappeared without leaving a trace, and he himself, uncertainly looking around, slowly stepped towards the mountain, having covered a huge distance. The plain disappeared, remaining far behind. Clean air, giant trees, huge predatory and herbivorous animals. Nature on the mountain was riotous in all its splendor, and Aizen enjoyed it. Simultaneously making plans for the future, simultaneously feeling how not far from him an unusual space-time transition was taking place with the transfer of part of the space. Slam and Kyuka Sujetsu punches through the white Setsu's chest, filling it to the brim with Aizen's spiritual energy. Dash and Aizen finds himself in his new body, using Kido to create clothes for himself. Jump and Aizen finds himself in a tree, clinging to it with chakra and absorbing Zetsu's memories. A surge of spiritual energy, and Aizen turns his head towards a nearby tree. Interesting world. What do you think, guy in the orange mask? Jin smiled. He smiled all the time, but right now he smiled wider than usual. In front of him stood the Hokage with Danzo and the elders, as well as half the village. The other half were on missions and did not yet suspect what dirty trick the Jinchuriki had pulled on them in the village. Old man, it wasn't me. Honestly. It did it itself. I was just chasing a cat. I'm surprised no one was hurt. The Hokage turned his gaze to the second culprit of the incident. Sasuke was whistling and picking at the ground with his foot, pretending that he had ended up there by accident. Itachi, Sasuke's older brother, was frowning at the younger one, who had managed to get into an unpleasant situation while he was on missions. People were looking at both of them with some distrust, trying to understand how these two had managed to destroy all of Konoha without injuring anyone, but incredibly frightening them. Jin looked at them all and realized that explanations alone would not do, and it was time to grab his feet and run as far away as possible. Who knew that explosive seal would be working and would explode, activating the rest of the seals scattered throughout the village? I think I'll go, Jin said and used the body flicker technique on the Hokage's head carved into the rock. But there were explosive tags there too, which activated in response to the strong surge of his chakra. That sucks. Ikemaru Jin's eternal smile disappeared from his face, replaced by another, as if he had swallowed something disgusting and sour, comparable to lemon, which Aizen shoved into his tea, forgetting to add sugar. An explosion, and Ikemaru philosophically looked at the sky, and then at the slowly, accelerating, approaching Earth, and then again at the sky, feeling the strength of the stone block of the destroyed building with the back of his head. The back of his head was stronger, and the stone block cracked, raising a cloud of dust and sand, and Jin opened his eyes in surprise, looking at the perfect, snow-white tiled ceiling. Huh! Where am I? Jin, or rather Naruto, asked quietly, feeling the back of his head. Or Jin? Finding a bandage there, he immediately looked around, smelling the familiar smell of the wards of the 4th Division. However, the place where he was did not look like the hospital wards of the 4th Division, but rather like a normal hospital of the living world, except for the strange black scribbles that enveloped his entire body and did not allow him to move. Swaying from side to side, and recognizing the scribbles as shinobi seals, Jin smiled, creating chakra outside of his body and began to shake the barrier with it. I don't advise you to do that. Your body hasn't recovered yet, Kurosaki said quietly from the inner world. And one more thing. I talked to Aizen, he said he'd help with our plan. When did you manage to talk to Aizen, Ichigo? Jin asked in surprise. From the very beginning. From the moment our world was destroyed. Who would have thought that it would be destroyed at that very moment when no one suspected anything, at the best moment of my life? Jin felt incredible grief and pain from Ichigo and smiled a false smile. His grief and pain resonated with Jin's feelings, but after a moment he felt how these feelings were drowning in the life force of his own body. And he also felt an incredibly strong call of nature, to which his stomach responded with a long and drawn-out roar of an unfed beast. In an instant, having torn off all the incredibly complex restraining barriers, Ikemaru jumped up on the bed and began to look for something that would satisfy his hunger, when he saw a huge bag near his bed. And my enemy is not asleep and has learned to cook food, Ikemaru whispered, remembering that secret organization of Konoha. They are appeasing me. Sasuke is trying to gain your trust in every way possible, Kurosaki said. He's following in your traitorous footsteps. I'm not talking about him, but about others. You said that Konoha has 2 secret organizations, Jin said. Yes, exactly. I somehow forgot. Ichigo's voice showed the indifference that was characteristic of him lately. But still, this bag of food is from Sasuke. I see. Jin smiled. I hope the food isn't poisoned. As if that changed anything, Jin, Ichigo said, watching as Jin pounced on the food in the bag. Listen, where's my Zanpakuto? I haven't heard from him lately. I didn't see it either. She probably materialized, and thanks to her life force she can do that very easily, and went somewhere. But where I don't know. Jin choked in horror, opening his eyes. His mind went numb, trying to comprehend the problems Shinso would bring him, given her 0 skills in existing in the real world, multiplied by the character of Ikamaru himself, of whom she was a female copy. And at this time, in Konoha, which was rebuilding itself from the explosions, in the Hokage Tower, one powerful old man was getting an alcohol tincture of the herb valerian, famous for its calming properties for the nerves, from a secret place. Having drunk several bottles from the bottle and without a snack, the 3rd Hokage, and it was he, smiled peacefully and lost consciousness, and his heart stopped beating. Now he was calm as a corpse. But he didn't know that Jin was capable of annoying people with his antics even after death. After all, Jin was the conductor of souls to the other world, and not a single strong soul could pass by him within a radius of several dozen kilometers before going to the other world. Oh, and how Jin swore when another spirit appeared to him in the middle of the night. However, this applied not only to Jin but also to his spiritual sword, Shinso. At that moment, as soon as the Hokage's soul had crawled out of the body a little, Shinso, who had emerged from the spatial fold, stepped on that soul, on the face, driving it back into the body. A whole squad of ANBU immediately ran into the office, the sensors raised by alarm, noticing that their ruler's chakra had begun to fade, and then completely disappeared. With a quiet yelp, Shinso looked around, assessed the situation, and quickly jumped out the window. Half of the ANBU squad disappeared through the window after Shinso, and the rest remained next to the Hokage's corpse, guarding it. Imagine the surprise of these poor fellows when the seemingly dead old man slowly rose and began to cough. You can't even die, Hiruzen groaned, rising with difficulty. The ANBU were frightened. After analyzing the situation, they immediately attacked their ruler, mistaking his resurrection for an enemy technique. Sasuke was happy. In addition to the fact that he was finally able to catch up with Naruto and get to know him, as well as become his friend, his older brother finally paid attention to him. Nothing could knock his happy mood off the positive bar, even the fact that today, after the final restoration of the village, his brother disappeared somewhere. Sasuke knew very well that sooner or later his older brother would return to keep an eye on him, protecting him from doing undoubtedly stupid and strange, but fun things. Fire element! Fireball! Sasuke formed seals and exhaled a small ball, shooting it right at the trash can with paper. Naruto had recently shared with him an undoubtedly important idea about cleaning Konoha from trash, while simultaneously combining it with fire element training. He suggested that Sasuke run around Konoha for speed, accuracy and time, shooting fireballs at any trash that came his way, undoubtedly doing an important and good deed. In case of a miss, Ikamaru advised running without looking back, so that his heels sparkled, as quickly as possible to the next trash, performing a maneuver to hide his tracks. Running and shooting balls on the move was difficult, and Sasuke rarely hit trash, often missing it. Fire element! Fireball! Sasuke released another ball and it flew into the window of the house, melting the glass and going out. Realizing that he had missed, Sasuke ran very fast, hearing dirty curses behind him. Naruto said that they were praising him so much for his diligence in his training, that in fact it was an expression of love for Sasuke, sincere and unclouded by a vile mind. Sasuke did not really believe it, running away at high speed every time he missed and covering his tracks, although he heard in these curses how passionately they wanted to love his mother, father, and his other relatives. Sasuke sincerely regretted that he could not answer in the same way. You can't really talk while running, and he was a very well-mannered boy to say such words. Oh, you censor dash! Sasuke said, stumbling. Well, almost well-mannered. Let's forget about that moment, okay? Meanwhile, Jin was looking for his Zanpakuto all over the village. He had no idea where she could have gone, so he looked for it everywhere, occasionally stopping for training, talking to his classmates who were outraged by his very adequate behavior, and running away from the Konoha police, who were always dissatisfied with his peaceful coexistence with the villagers. He relieved stress on the villagers, and the villagers on him. Idle and tranquility. I didn't steal your beans! Ikemaru yelled, running away from the plump merchant with a bushy mustache. He ran slowly, so that the merchant felt that he could catch up with the fugitive any minute, if only he could speed up. As soon as Ikemaru broke away from the merchant, he immediately pretended to be an asthmatic, terribly tired from the chase. The merchant saw this, and it immediately gave him confidence and strength, which he spent on the chase. Having made a small circle, they returned back, where only burnt boards, wet with water, remained from the trading shop. Ikemaru recognized Sasuke's work. Wait, Ikemaru, keep an eye on him, Ichigo said. Ikemaru almost stumbled. Now is the time to meet Aizen. What? Although no, I know. You contacted him again in this world. Right. Yes, Ichigo answered and disappeared. Ikemaru immediately accelerated and disappeared behind the illusion, catching up with Sasuke. He watched him all day, expecting to meet Aizen, watching as Sasuke stopped running around the village until midnight, practicing throwing kunai at the training ground. Until he sensed multiple simultaneous deaths from the Uchiha quarter and the police building. Did you feel it too, Ichigo? Ikemaru asked. Exo. Answer. Ikemaru immediately used the body flicker technique and moved in it at great speed, reaching the Uchiha quarter, forgetting about watching Sasuke. Stopping on the tiled roof of one of the walls and closing the quarter, he saw many corpses on its streets. Lit by the moon, they seemed snow-white, ghostly. Still fresh dark drops of blood glistened, soaking the ground and stone slabs of the paths, leaving dark spots on them. Something echoed deep in his soul when he looked closely and noticed the faces of familiar shinobi among the corpses. He slowly inhaled and exhaled, realizing their death and accepting it. The emotions of his body were unusual for him. It was quite difficult to restrain them. You know, Ichigo, I thought you'd find a way to save them, Ikemaru said, moving his gaze to the paper walls of the building opposite, sprinkled with blood. Why? It's necessary for the plan to revive our world, Ichigo said. A shadow came out of the building opposite, pushing aside a paper panel. Here he is, Aizen. Ikemaru grimaced and suppressed his feelings, hiding them behind a serene, goofy smile. Aizen appeared next to him from the body flicker technique, wearing a gray cloak and a large straw hat on his head, holding his Zanpakuto in his left hand, which glittered in the moonlight. Ikemaru slowly turned to him. Greetings, former Captain Aizen. Ikemaru looked Aizen up and down, noticing that he wore a pendant around his neck. A blue ball glowing from the inside on a silver chain. I didn't think I'd meet you here. What do you mean? Hoping that I died too. Didn't you think that whoever sent you here wouldn't follow you? Aizen asked. That has nothing to do with our case, though. Where is Kurosaki Jin? Ikemaru felt a gaze. Aizen's eyes seemed to hover over his soul, mind and body, concentrating all their attention on him. He was being pierced by someone else's attention, looking into his essence. Interesting, Kurosaki Ichigo. You've hidden yourself well from my sight, Aizen said. You know my plans. What will you do? I don't care about this world, Aizen. Do whatever you want, Kurosaki answered him from the inner world. Just don't bother me. So you don't mind? Aizen asked. Ikemaru tried to understand what they were talking about, but when he didn't understand anything, he decided to ask Ichigo later. Not at all, Ichigo replied, and Aizen disappeared into the body flicker technique. Let's go, Jin. We shouldn't be seen by others, Ichigo said. Sasuke will be here soon, and then the shinobi. Okay, Jin replied and moved to his house. Ichigo, we wanted to discuss Aizen's help with our plan. Jin took out his key and